Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal. See playlist for other chapters and novels. Join now our Telegram channel now and enjoy exclusive early access. t.me/blood_immortal_official. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 321. Creak. The door to the mansion opened. Angels dressed in white robes opened the door and greeted Michael. His complex thoughts refused to be organized. Just now. The words Yu-Won had spoken were wreaking havoc in his mind. How much do you trust Metatron? Stab. It was a statement that made him nauseous just thinking about it. How much did he trust Metatron? He is the Heavenly King. Michael stood still for a moment and closed his eyes. His vision turned pitch black. With nothing to see, his thoughts grew even deeper. He who is closer to the heavens than any other. The one and only great being we must serve. It was impossible to doubt such a Metatron. Long ago. It was the same when he first defended an angel and fought against the demons. Michael had never doubted Metatron even once. Metatron's actions were sublime, and he was more than enough to be a role model for all angels. Michael had sworn eternal loyalty and faith to such a Metatron. And it was the same even now, after hundreds of heavenly demon wars. However, who do you think started the heavenly demon war? Why, do you really think that the ones killing the angels of heaven are demons? Why did that bastard's words linger in his mind like this? Do I think the same? No, that couldn't be it. His faith in Metatron was unwavering. If he were to ask him to sacrifice himself for the heavens, Michael was confident that he would do so willingly. Yes, there was no way that Metatron would have started the heavenly demon war to kill the angels of heaven. However, it's true that countless angels have died in the heavenly demon war. There were parts of Yu-Won's words that he agreed with. But the heavenly demon war had already lost its meaning and become an event. There was no point in fighting any further. What is the matter? As Michael was lost in thought, the mansion's butler approached him. Michael opened his eyes, awakening from his reverie. He then immediately turned to face the direction he had come from. I have somewhere I need to go for a moment. I will escort you. As the archangel's attendants approached, Michael shook his head. No, I will go alone. Where are you going? I must visit the king. Do you mean Metatron? The attendant looked up at the night sky, which was already dark. The two moons were shining brightly, but it was quite dark. It was that late at night. Nevertheless, Michael made a hasty decision as if he were being chased by something. There isn't much time left until the heavenly demon war. He had already made up his mind. He had to stop this fight as soon as possible, or there would be no more sacrifices. Flap. Michael spread his wings. The heavenly king Metatron was at the highest point in heaven. A small castle floating in the sky above the sky. It was a palace for only one angel. The heavenly castle was a place where only the heavenly king and the archangels who received his permission could enter. Michael flew to the heavenly castle with his wings spread out. Michael entered the castle and folded his wings, and walked into the grand hall covered in a red carpet. Metatron was already waiting for him. Michael greets the heavenly king. He knelt on one knee and looked down. It was an act that was considered disrespectful to look straight at him. His knees were facing the tall angel sitting on the king's seat. I knew you would come. An angel with long blonde hair that reached his waist and skin that was so transparent that it sparkled. The history of heaven and the godlike being of the living angels. Metatron. He looked down at Michael. Raise your head. Yes. Why have you come? At this late hour. There was no sense of reproach. It meant that he would take into account the urgent need to come at this late hour. Since it was such an urgent matter, he would listen more attentively to your words. At that tone of Metatron's voice, Michael barely managed to support his head, which was about to fall down. I have something to say. Go ahead. I would like you to stop the heavenly demon war here. The heavenly demon war? Metatron's eyes narrowed. It was a meaningful expression. Of course. To say that the long battle between the demon king and heaven, which had been going on for thousands of years, should be ended so easily. Even if he was angry, Metatron asked calmly. Why are you saying this all of a sudden? That's. Michael, who was about to bring up Yu-Won's story, paused for a moment. Rather than saying that he was swayed by the words of a mere human, it would be better to talk about his own thoughts. Michael closed his mouth for a moment and then opened it. Too much blood has been shed. Blood, yes. And if this fight continues, more blood will continue to be shed. As the fight dragged on, more angels would die. It was only natural. No angel would be unaware of that fact. Nevertheless, the heavenly demon war did not stop. That's why Michael made up his mind. So I dare to ask, what if you asked for a truce? A truce, a truce. Metatron seemed to be in deep thought for a moment, muttering the same words repeatedly. How much time passed like that? Do you remember how the heavenly demon war started? Michael nodded at the sudden question. Yes, I remember. What was that angel's name? Name you mean, it was such a long time ago. Moreover, he was a lower-ranking angel who would not have met Michael, who was already in the position of archangel at that time. Not many angels remembered the incident, but he remembered his name. He was a young angel who had just passed the age of majority. His name was Tamiel. Tamiel, it was an unfamiliar name. So much time had passed that his name was no longer in the back of his mind. When the heavenly demon war is over, his name will disappear completely. He will not even be able to receive comfort for his resentment. Metatron's voice was filled with sadness. Metatron, who had been reminiscing about a small angel who had lost his life long ago, soon spoke in a determined voice. If you give in to the sacrifice in front of you once, it may be repeated. Then you will hesitate to fight for fear of shedding blood, and in the end, you will lose everything. Thud. Metatron rose from his seat and took a step toward Michael. Michael, yes. Do you want that? No. Then that's a relief. Metatron smiled brightly. There was no reproach or scolding. Thud, thud. After patting Michael's shoulder a few times, Metatron turned around again. I'll pretend I didn't hear the story today. Go back. The fallen mandate. Michael rose from his seat and bowed his head. As he walked out of the castle, Michael's mind became entangled once more. He spread his wings and flew aimlessly through the sky for a while. When he returned to the mansion like that, is the story over? The first voice that had messed with his mind rang out. I'm sure I told you not to stand out. Yu-1 was waiting near the mansion. Michael's face crumpled as soon as he saw his unpleasant face. However, Yu-1 did not care about his ferocious expression. That's right, but, can't you tell? I'll take that as a no. Swoosh. The wind blew in one direction. The surrounding air was filled with Michael's mana. Whoosh. A gale came to Yu-1's mind. The wind blowing around him began to turn hostile. Michael raised his mana as if he was about to attack him at any moment. Despite that, he didn't immediately attack. What are you hesitating for? Hesitating. The sword and shield of heaven. The wind that punishes and condemns evil. Isn't that the Archangel Michael? The wind that was moving towards Yu-1 faltered for a moment. He's hesitating. Michael realized why his mind was so complicated. If you think I'm wrong, you wouldn't hesitate. So, you must know that you have to stop the heavenly demon war, but the reason you can't is because of the king's orders. Crack. Michael gritted his teeth as he was constantly being hit with the truth. What in the world is this guy in front of me? What in the world makes him know my mind more accurately than I do? He was angry and his pride was hurt. But he couldn't attack because it was true. However, I can't betray the king. The loyalty that had been built up over a long period of time that was hard to remember was not so weak that it would collapse so easily. And Yu-1 knew that fact as well. Archangel Michael. He knew very well how long he had been by Metatron's side. I didn't come here to tell you to betray him. Then. You met Metatron, didn't you? Eyes that seemed to see through him as if he knew everything. Crunch. Yu-1 approached Michael, as if Metatron was approaching. If you had to choose between the heavenly king Metatron and all the angels of heaven. Click. Yu-1, who had come to a stop right in front of his nose, looked up at Michael, who was a head taller than him. Which side would you choose? The place where Michael left. Metatron hovered around the place for a while. Blood. The words that Michael had left behind lingered in his mind. We have shed too much blood. How many angels had died in the last heavenly demon war? It was probably in the hundreds of millions. It was a natural result since it wasn't a single war, but a war that had taken place over hundreds of times. Michael was right, too much blood had been shed. However, it's faster than I thought. He had thought that the heavenly demon war would continue for at least 1,000 years, if not longer. The beginning may have been trivial, but the fight between the angels and demons had deepened with each repetition of the heavenly demon war, and the hatred for each other had gradually built up. And Metatron thought that this point in time was when the confrontation between the angels and demons towards each other was at its peak. But suddenly, Michael insisted that the heavenly demon war should be stopped. He said that too many angels had died and that more would die in the future. Well, we did shed a lot of blood. There were a few angels who made the same argument as Michael. Every time, Metatron sent them back with the same words. But this time, it was different. Not a seraph, but an archangel. Furthermore, Michael was the most influential angel among the archangels. Of all people, Michael. It wasn't a good opponent. It was a situation where he couldn't just brush it off like before. It was obvious that once the spark had spread, it would spread rapidly with the wind. Slowly, crunch, Metatron's footsteps, which had been walking in a circle in the same direction without a purpose, stopped right there. I need to raise the stakes. Chapter 322. Day broke. As always, angels clad in armor and weapons gathered in Heaven's City. It was time for breakfast. Angels were gathered in a large dining hall near the training grounds. Just then, a man in an unusual outfit walked into the dining hall as the angels were busy serving and distributing soup. A human? What's a human doing here? This was heaven. The realm of angels. Although quite a few players had entered heaven and climbed the tower, their numbers were not that many. Above all, it was rare for a player to climb past the 90th floor. They were the ones who had the potential to become rankers someday, and rancor was a realm that only the chosen ones could reach, so few players could reach it that it could be counted. Above all, it was a wartime situation now. Other than the angels, the entry of players was strictly controlled here. Soon, angels surrounded him as he ate. Hey, who are you? No one other than angels is allowed here. This is a wartime situation. Humans can't just wander around here. Who let this guy in? Having entered the wartime system, the angels were much sharper than usual. The angels surrounding the man exuded a fierce atmosphere. With the Sky Demon War about to begin, uninvited guests were unwelcome. But then, stop it. At the familiar voice, the angels reflexively stopped what they were doing. Clatter. Yuan, who had been eating, put down the spoon he was holding. The angels' gazes gathered towards Michael, who had entered the dining hall. He is a comrade who will fight alongside us from today. A comrade, this human. The ripple effect of Michael's words was considerable. Some looked disapproving. They were clearly displeased that a human would be involved in the sacred Sky Demon War. However, no angel dared to protest to Michael right away. That was because there were so many angels who trusted and supported Michael. Stand up and introduce yourself. Gulp. Yuan rose from his seat. I'm Kim Yuan. Please take care of me. Kim Yuan. Is that real? Someone, search for him on Kit. It looks like it. The angels buzzed. They had thought that just some unheard of human had come to the dining hall, but it turned out to be Yuan. Yuan, who had entered the upper ranks of the high rankers in the shortest period of time, was not well known by face, but there were few who did not know his name, regardless of race. Swish. Michael raised a finger to his lips. The buzzing angels shut their mouths. Michael, who had silenced the angels with a single gesture, continued speaking. He has agreed to help us only for the duration of this Sky Demon War. Do not be too wary of him and treat him kindly. Yes, resume your meals. The distribution of food resumed. Yuan sat down and picked up his spoon. Michael approached him. Don't take it too hard. It's a time when vigilance is high. I understand. It's wartime. Although nothing special was happening, the dining hall was filled with tension. Despite nothing special happening, there was a sense of tension wafting through the restaurant. Raggle, who raised his head at the sound of his name being called, waved his hand with difficulty. The sky had entered a wartime situation since a year before the start of the Heavenly Demon War. During this time, the angels strengthened their training and thoroughly repelled any possible external intervention. In this period, it was only natural for the angels to reject humans like Yuan. He was not narrow-minded enough to be offended by such a thing. However, everyone is sensitive, aren't they? Yuan felt strange about the strange tension that was circulating among the angels. But that was only strange to Yuan, who was human. In Michael's eyes, it was rather more natural. Because the Heavenly Demon War is just around the corner. Is it that important? It repeats every 10 years. Because it repeats, it's more important. This is an event where the pride of the race is at stake. Is that so? To players who were neither angels nor demons, the Heavenly Demon War was nothing more than an interesting form of entertainment. It was the same as the Muram War in the lower floors. Many players and rankers predicted the victory or defeat of the Heavenly Demon War and even made bets on the outcome of the fight. Would this fight be a victory for the angels, or a defeat for the demons? A fight where neither side could win or lose, only wounds, was an event that constantly became a hot topic among many players. You manage the soldiers. Which angel manages the war supplies? The weapons, food, and potions to be used in the heavenly demon war are provided through the Prime Minister, Ragal. Not only supplies related to the war, but all items in the sky are like that. That's a lot of authority. Would you like to meet him? I would be honored. Clank. Michael began to eat the soup he had been served, just like the other angels. Don't move as soon as you finish eating. Yes. Along with the answer, you one started eating again. Facing each other, they silently moved their spoons, and Michael glanced at you one every once in a while. My choice shouldn't have been wrong. Right now, he neither trusted nor distrusted you one completely. Right now, they were just together because of the common thought that the heavenly demon war had to be stopped. For the time being, he planned to move with him for a while and watch him closely. But if he does anything that could harm the sky, even a little bit, just in case he caught his eye, Michael lowered his head. I'll cut his throat right away. The Prime Minister of Heaven. Just looking at that position, it could be said that it was the position next to the Heavenly King. As it was an important position responsible for all the assets and supplies of the heavenly realm, his authority was needless to say. No, he thought it would be like that. But what the hell? Ragal, the Prime Minister of Heaven and the Archangel, had a different atmosphere than any of the angels you one had met so far. Luxurious marble floor, a spacious study painted with pure white wallpaper. Ragal was nodding off with his head down, with documents piled up like a tower on his desk in the study. Ragal, Michael, oh, Michael. Metatron and the Minister Ragal were close, but Michael did not know that the news would travel this fast. Ragal, who raised his head at the voice calling him, waved his hand with difficulty. His pure white skin was close to being pale, and because of that, the dark circles under his eyes looked darker and blacker. His face was completely exhausted, not just tired. It was not easy to see a high ranker like that so tired. Since when have you not been able to sleep? It's been about 3 months. Do it while you rest. There's not enough to do while resting. Whether he was anemic or not, Ragal got up while staggering. Coffee, or wine, both are fine. I need a drink. Coffee, oh, but what about you? That was when Ragal discovered Wu Won. Was it because his eyes were dim so he couldn't see, or was he pretending not to know? He couldn't know for sure, but Wu Won greeted him without minding. I'm Kim Wu Won. Oh, you're Kim Wu Won. Raphael the Archangel was talking about you. Coffee, or wine. It seemed like the news about Wu Won had already reached Ragal's ears because of the commotion that happened in the morning. Wu Won made eye contact with Ragal. For some reason, his expression was the same, but the atmosphere felt different. What would he be thinking while looking at him? Wu Won answered after thinking for a while. I'll have coffee, please. Okay, pour. Ragal poured the coffee. The fragrant smell of coffee spread throughout the study. Ragal opened his mouth with his back against Michael and Wu Won. The heavenly demon war is just around the corner. I have a lot of work to do because of that. I know, it's always busy around this time. But Michael. What? Why are you adding more work when you know that? Clack. A drop of coffee fell on the cup. Ragal turned around again with 2 cups of coffee in his hands. As if there was no one there. Ragal continued speaking without giving Wu Won a single glance. A race that is neither an angel nor a demon. It gives me a headache just thinking about bringing a bat-like bastard who doesn't know which side to take. Swish. Ragal handed Wu Won a cup of coffee. Only then did Ragal look at Wu Won and smiled. As if to say, don't worry, it's not about you. Here, drink. What was he talking about just now? Unlike his aggressive speech, his actions of smiling and handing him a cup of coffee he made himself were quite friendly. Wu Won looked at the cup and Ragal's face alternately and reached out. I'll drink it well. Wu Won, who received the cup, leaned against the wall while taking a sip of coffee. The situation was getting quite interesting. Michael, say something. I don't know what you're talking about. Yesterday, you went to the Heavenly King and said you'd end the Heavenly Demon War. Michael's pupils grew bigger. Had that story already reached Ragal's ears? Michael, who had known that Metatron and Prime Minister Ragal were close, didn't know that the news would spread this quickly. Ragal briefly clicked his tongue as he watched Michael, who was momentarily frozen in bewilderment. Get a hold of yourself, my friend. Where are you lost in thought, and what are you looking at? Michael closed his mouth at Ragal's expression, which seemed to be looking at him with pity. It was as if he knew everything. He completely ignored Wu Won, and even knew why and how he was moving. Metatron knew everything. However, I need to be sure. It was enough to waver once. There was no second time. Raggle's snake-like tongue knew. He had a tongue that could enlighten even the devil if he wanted to. But the timing was not good. If only he had talked to him a little earlier, he might not have come this far. The sure reason why we have to continue this heavenly demon war. I want to know that. The face, which had been exhausted, was nowhere to be seen. There was nothing left on his face, where the dark circles had disappeared, except for a cold impression. Didn't the Heavenly King tell you enough yesterday? I wasn't convinced. If it was Metatron's words, it was the nature of angels to burn even death. Unlike demons, who believed that only strength was everything according to the law of the strong, the nature of angels could be said to be loyalty, which was like faith in the king. But now, for the first time, Michael broke away from that nature and questioned Metatron's words. We call it corruption when faith disappears. Wang. The player kit placed on the desk in the study rang. Juck back. Silence filled the study. Raggle walked over to his desk and checked the player kit. You must know what the punishment for corruption is. I know. I'm glad. Sook. Michael's hand went to his waist. Wu Wan, who had been watching the situation, also put down the glass he was holding. Raggle's atmosphere changed. I'm sorry, Michael. Duruk. The door to the study opened. Thwack. A spear thrown forcefully from somewhere flew towards Michael's neck. Quang. A huge hole was made in the wall of the study. Michael, who had moved his head to avoid the spear, had a sword drawn from its scabbard in his hand. May I help you? Wu Wan asked. This place was already surrounded by numerous angels. Moreover, in front of him was the Archangel of Heaven, Raggle. Furthermore, Michael did not even bring all of his weapons. No, nevertheless, Michael shook his head. He looked out of the hole in the wall at the angels who were aiming their spears at him. They are not guilty. Do you mean to surrender? No way. Michael shook his head. At the same time. I will not kill anyone, I will defeat them all. Flutter. Michael spread his wings. Chapter 323. Whoosh. A spear was aimed at Michael's back and stabbed. Michael turned his body after breaking the shoulder of an angel. At the same time, swish, Michael's outstretched hand grabbed the shaft of the spear. Hyok, thank you, PFF'd. Michael kicked the chest of the angel who had stabbed him in the back. The angel flew and hit the wall, slumping down. Michael looked at the angel who had fainted and lost consciousness for a moment, and rolled the spear in his hand. Please bring me a spear like this by hand. Whoosh. The angels around him hesitated as Michael grabbed the spear. The number of angels who had already collapsed around him exceeded dozens. They were all elites of the angels with skills close to rankers. Among them, there were also 2 angels at the level of archangels. However, Michael had subdued them all too easily, even without his main weapon, the spear. It's more annoying than I thought. Raggle's expression gradually distorted as the situation turned around. He had no proper weapon and was surrounded. It was a disadvantageous situation for Michael. Nevertheless, Michael overcame this situation without difficulty. It was a different situation than expected. Should I go out too? The moment Raggle reached for the sword at his waist and took a step. Are you much stronger than expected? Yuan's voice approached from nearby. Raggle turned his head quickly. When did he come next to him? The coffee cup next to him solved the question that came to mind for a moment. Was he just standing still? In the midst of this chaos, Yuan hadn't moved a muscle. Michael had told him to stay still, and Yuan really hadn't moved. Yuan's gaze was fixed on Michael the entire time. No one has died in this fight. It has been that way so far, and it will probably be that way in the future. Swish. It was then that Yuan turned to Raggle. But the story will be different if you get involved. Chuck, 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 chuck. Mana was imbued in Yuan's eyes. Wan Jiamjung, did he let his guard down? Raggle's body, who made eye contact, stiffened instantly. That was the moment he realized it was too late. If you move even a little. Swish. A bright red sword blade was pointed at Raggle's neck. I'll cut it off. A sinister mana was transmitted through the sharpness of the sword. Raggle gulped and glanced at the opponent who was pointing the sword. It was certain, although he couldn't believe it because of his pale face. He was definitely skilled enough to cut the neck of his own Archangel of Heaven. Susano. He was once called the strongest of the 3 great evils, a high ranker. He couldn't have missed him, the Prime Minister who managed everything in heaven, leading tens of thousands of undead legions and dancing on the battlefield with his ghostly swordsmanship. Summoning Susano as an undead was something that had been revealed in the previous test. But his skills were probably not at their peak. In that case, I have to escape somehow. Spot. Raggle's body moved. He twisted his neck to get away from the sword, and then tried to attack Susanoo directly. But, shua, as he tried to do that, Raggle's body swayed, and blood spurted up from above. For a moment, he didn't understand what was going on. How on earth? You used to sit at the head of the desk for a long time, but you've gotten really dull. Kaya, just before he could turn his body, Susanoo's sword moved. Susanoo's sword was faster than he could dodge. As the faltering Raggle glared at Susanoo, his head was grabbed by Yuan's hand. Kwang. Raggle, whose head had been slammed into the ground, moved his upper body. But strangely, the head that was held in Yuan's hand didn't move an inch. Kuok. The tendons in Yuan's arm bulged. The power of a giant is imbued in your arm. Yuan had activated his gigantification at the same time as he summoned Susanoo. Don't move around unnecessarily and just stay still. Kuok. Kiyu. Yuyu. It felt like his skull was going to split from the force of the grip. Raggle also knew well that Yuan used the skill of the giant hunter Heracles, gigantification. He couldn't beat Yuan in strength. He was clearly aware of that. What he hadn't expected was Susanoo. It's beyond its peak. Just now, Susanoo's sword had moved at a speed that far exceeded Raggle's dynamic vision. And even though it had been swung lightly, the red blade had cut off his wings too easily. He didn't have the power to control tens of thousands of undead troops, but the speed and power of the sword clearly surpassed its peak. This much, and it's just Kim Yuan's summon. The power of an undead was determined by the ability of the necromancer. No matter how great an undead was, if the necromancer was nothing special, it wouldn't be able to use its full power. On the other hand, even the corpse of an ordinary player could exert the power of a rancor, depending on the necromancer's ability. This was the latter case. Raggle, who was looking at Yuan with his head on the ground, had a different look in his eyes. You're more than we expected. Dangerous. Kuok. Yuan's grip tightened. As if to avoid becoming even uglier, Raggle closed his mouth and stifled his screams. I'm glad you know that. Yuan's eyes, which had been looking down at Raggle, sparkled. His skills aren't that great compared to his rank. Was his top 100 rank because of his position as the Heavenly Prime Minister? The Heavenly Prime Minister was practically the second in command of a large guild. He had thought that because of his high rank, he would naturally have the skills to match, but it was completely different from what he had expected. And his abilities convinced him even more. Instead of becoming Metatron's lackey, you were promised the position of Prime Minister. A gasp. He could feel the body of Raggle, who was being crushed by his hand, trembling. As expected, that brief moment was enough of an answer. For now, stay here and suffer in silence. Boom. Crash, clang. The piles of paper scattered around the study fluttered in the wind. Michael, who had his spear in hand, was preparing to finish things off. I have a lot to ask you, after all. The angels had fallen to the ground. There were few angels who had shed blood. Even those who had were only scratched by the wind and hadn't received any fatal wounds. The tip of Michael's spear stopped. Only then did Michael look back at Yuan and Raggle. Is it over? Yes. Yuan, who was sitting on Raggle's body. And Susanoo, who was pointing the tip of his sword at Raggle, who was lying there. They had exchanged glances while fighting, but it was a rare sight to see. None other than Raggle, the Prime Minister of Heaven, was lying on the ass of a human. What is this, Raggle? What are you doing, Michael? Raggle gritted his teeth. It seemed that even he knew that his current state was ridiculous. This is clear treason. I know. You know, and you still do this. If I'm wrong, I'll pay the price. I'll give up my neck or my soul, and I'll accept eternal punishment in the fires of hell. It had all started with a simple suspicion. Michael had sought out Metatron to clear up his suspicions. But his suspicions only grew stronger, and he began to move with Yuan to gain certainty. And now, he had come to this place to meet Raggle. His suspicions about the heavenly demon war only grew stronger. This. All right, stop it. Swish. Susanoo's sword tip came closer. He, who had been glaring at Michael with his neck veins bulging just a moment ago, flinched and shut his mouth. Yuan, who had been sitting on Raggle's body waiting for the fight to end, got up from his seat. Susanoo glared at Raggle, who was carefully getting up. Then, that's enough. At Yuan's words, Susanoo turned his gaze away and turned his body. Regretfully, he opened his mouth while sharpening the kusanagi in his hand. I wish I could have stabbed him a little more next time. I'll try harder. I hope effort isn't all you have. Swish. Susanoo returned to Yuan's shadow. Michael, who knew about Susanoo as he was an old high ranker, looked down at Yuan's shadow and said. You control a fearsome guy. He's a useful guy. Was the sword he was holding the Kusanagi? Do you know about the Kusanagi? Do you know about the Kusanagi? This time, it was the turn to find the bat on the Demon King's side. I know that it's an item that the three-eyed beings covet. The energy I sensed was considerable. The demonic sword, Kusanagi. As a demonic sword that possessed evil energy, the Archangel Michael recognized the sword's existence right away. Well, it's fine if it's Susano. That guy liked to kill people since the beginning. I know well. Of course you do. There was even an agenda in heaven to subjugate him. Susano killed both humans and angels without discrimination. Heaven rarely intervened in human affairs unless it was absolutely necessary. However, the fact that heaven discussed subjugating Susano meant that Susano's notoriety was that great. You're really something. Susano didn't say anything, even though he must have heard everything. Yuan sighed inwardly and looked down at Raggle. His gaze was slightly evasive. Yuan bent down and met Raggle's eyes. Raggle. I have nothing to say. What Metatron is doing is wrong. Was it because of the provocative words? Raggle glared at Yuan with fire in his eyes. Don't take his name so lightly. Did he make you do something in exchange for promising you the position of Prime Minister? Perhaps because he had heard a similar story before, Raggle's expression didn't change. He shook his head at Yuan's question. There's no such thing. Really? Creak. Yuan's eyes flashed gold. You're lying. Eye of truth detects a lie. Bang. Cuck. Raggle's waist buckled. Raggle, who had been punched in the stomach, retched as if he was about to vomit at any moment. Out of the 100 worlds, the Murim world is the world where torture techniques are most developed. Stab. Stab. Yuan's fingertips stabbed Raggle's body one after another. Then, Raggle's eyes grew wide as if they were about to tear, and pain surged through every part of his body like a wave. Quote exclamation mark quote. His mouth was open, but no scream came out. His voice was blocked. A pain he had never felt before in his life traveled up his spine to the top of his head. Humans and angels don't feel pain much differently. I can inflict pain that is several times to dozens of times less. Knock, knock. Yuan pointed to his eyes. Blunt lies won't work, so if you're thinking of lying again, think carefully. With the eye of truth, lies made while looking into his eyes wouldn't work. Unless he bit his tongue and committed suicide, Raggle was in a situation where he had no choice but to tell Yuan everything he knew. I'm tired of the same questions, so let's change the question this time. Yuan could tell that Raggle had been promised the position of Prime Minister by Metatron without having to hear it from his mouth. That wasn't important right now. The Heavenly Demon War couldn't have lasted this long without any measures. In heaven, it was Raggle. If so, who's the bat on the Demon King's side? Next, it was time to find the bat on the Demon King's side. Chapter 324. The intricate drawings on the blackboard. Plans for various events, and the things to be done after that. It was a record of those. And among them, Wu Wan, who had been looking at the records about the Heavenly Demon War for a long time, opened his mouth. There's a bat. At those words, everyone's eyes gathered. That's impossible. The Heavenly Demon War had been going on for too long. Hundreds of years. If you were very generous, you could understand it up to 1,000 years. But it had been going on for nearly thousands of years. It's not a problem to stop the fight, but is it really possible that the conclusion hasn't come out for so long? A part that I hadn't wondered about. But in some ways, it was natural. No matter how similar the power between angels and demons, the two races were, it was strange that the conclusion hadn't come out like this. Unless someone was intentionally not making a conclusion. A bat? Michael asked curiously at Wu Wan's words. He seemed to know what a bat meant, but didn't understand why the word was being used now. Well, in the first place, when Wu Wan came to find Raggle, he didn't explain the reason to Michael. The Heavenly Demon War must have been manipulated. Manipulation, so that the outcome of the war would not be decided. Michael's face hardened coldly at Wu Wan's answer. Are you saying that Raggle made the Heavenly Demon War like that? The Prime Minister of Heaven is not only in charge of personal strength, but also of managing the war supplies of heaven. A position that can adjust the overall power. Fortunately, he understood quickly. Only then did Michael understand why Wu Wan wanted to meet Raggle. The Prime Minister of Heaven. The one who manages the money of the guild and all the war supplies of heaven in a wartime situation. That's why Raggle was the one who was best suited to balance the power in heaven. Then it's obvious that the other side will suspect you. But I have to check. Wu Wan met Raggle through Michael. The most urgent task in the Heavenly Demon War was to shake Michael. And the second was to find the bat. The second was now halfway done. All that remained was to fill in the remaining half. Wu Wan looked at Raggle again. No answer. Cook. Wu Wan urged an answer, piercing the acupoint that added pain. Yeah. On one side, Michael was standing with a dazed expression as if he had been shocked. As Raggle's words ended, he muttered as if he were frustrated. There's no end to the waves. His powerless voice contained regret for the years that had passed. Under the name of the Heavenly Demon War, how many angels had died fighting in that fight? But that Heavenly Demon War was planned. Thud. Michael strode toward Raggle. Raggle was startled by the murderous expression on his face and the strength in his hand holding the spear. Have you really been dragging out this fight on purpose for all those long years? I couldn't help it. It was the will of the Heavenly King. No matter if it was the will of the Heavenly King. Swish. Ack. Michael's eyes widened as he grabbed Raggle's neck and squeezed. You do know that this is an unforgivable sin, don't you? Crackle. Raggle couldn't even scream as his neck was squeezed. As if he was extremely angry, Michael tightened his grip as if Raggle's neck was going to snap. But then, click. Please, hold back for now. Yuan's hand grabbed Michael's arm and pulled it down. Michael, who had momentarily lost his mind and was excited, turned his head and looked at Yuan. The strength in his hand slowly disappeared, and Raggle let out a rough, short breath. And so did Michael, who was very angry. Phew. Michael closed his eyes as he let out the anger that had built up inside him with his breath. Right, it had already been thousands of years. Although he found out late, nothing would change even if he took more time. Now, slowly but surely. Michael nodded as he looked at Yuan. From now on, do as you please. Kill or spare him. It seemed that he had gained quite a lot of trust. Yuan, who was now in charge of Raggle's life and death, answered that he understood and looked back at Raggle. There was one last remaining question. When does the Heavenly Demon War begin? Was it because the question was absurd? Michael, who had barely held back his anger and left the matter to Yuan, opened his mouth as if it was ridiculous. The Heavenly Demon War is. It's tonight at midnight. Michael, who was about to answer that there were still 9 more days left, turned to Raggle. Tonight. By now, the news should have reached the soldiers through the player kit. This Heavenly Demon War will start a little earlier. What are you talking about? That's a breach of contract with the administrator. The Heavenly Demon War had already become an event bound by the system. Each race had earned a lot of points because of it, but in return, they could only start the Heavenly Demon War at a set time due to the contract with the administrator. And yet, they were arbitrarily bringing forward the schedule of the Heavenly Demon War. This was no different from a surprise attack. Is it because of Michael? At Raggle's answer, Yuan made a serious expression for the first time. His concern had become a reality. The schedule for the Heavenly Demon War had been brought forward. This meant one thing. They planned to see the end of the Heavenly Demon War. When Archangel Michael insisted on stopping the Heavenly Demon War, Metatron suddenly overturned the promised schedule and focused on turning the Heavenly Demon War into a full-fledged game. History repeated itself, and this time was no different. The timing was much earlier than Yuan remembered, but the situation was the same. We need to hurry. As Yuan's voice became more serious than ever, Michael also realized the seriousness of the situation. Yes. Thud. Michael gritted his teeth. Metatron's face, whom he had met just last night, came to his mind. The face of the king he had trusted and followed so much now felt like a monster worse than a devil. Metatron. Thud. Thud. The greater the trust and devotion, the greater the sense of betrayal. And, his eyes finally turned. Metatron. Flutter. Michael spread his wings. Roar. As if he could no longer stand it, he flew into the sky with fire in his eyes. Thwack. The fastest angel among hundreds of millions of angels. Michael was faster than the wind with his wings spread out. Michael, who disappeared in the blink of an eye, disappeared, spreading a lot of wind around him. There was no time to stop him. It was obvious where Michael had gone. It's too sudden. It was not a good choice to clash with Metatron here and now. Metatron was like a king and a god to the angels. Furthermore, he had already drawn his sword at Michael. Metatron, who was more prudent than anyone else, would have prepared double and triple measures in mind for failure. It's like sticking your head into a tiger's mouth. Tick, tick. Wu Wan took out the player kit, hurriedly sent a message, and looked in the direction where Michael had disappeared. I can't help it. If possible, he wanted to fight with certainty, even if it took more time. That's why he acquired the best power, Michael, and secured Raggle. But if this happened, there was nothing he could do. Tick. Wu Wan, who had finished writing the message, put the player kit in his arms and turned his head. On one side, Ragel glanced at Wu-won and quickly avoided his gaze. There's one last thing you have to do. Swish! A murderous glare erupted from Wu-won's shadow. Susanoo rode the shadow and clung to Ragel, sharpening his sword inside. A creepy feeling. Ragel gulped as he felt like Susanoo's sword would be pointed at his neck at any moment. You know, we're not in a relationship where we can laugh and talk like that. Are you threatening me with my life again? That's what I'm going to do. Because that seems to work the best. Surrender by force was most effective for those who prioritize their lives. Ragel had enjoyed power under Metatron for a long time, having been promised the position of Prime Minister. Honor and power. Such people valued their lives the most when it was hot. Aren't you going to join the winning side? That's why Wu-won could be sure. Whether it was Heaven or the Demon King, once either side finds the bat, they will be able to use it. Do you still need more time to think? Which side to join? You could tell just by looking at Ragel's eyes. He was still struggling. Do you still think Metatron will win? You don't know anything about the king. There's no way Michael can defeat the king. Not Michael, me, Michael and Metatron. Ragel, who was contemplating between the two angels, was presented with another option by Wu-won. Do you think I'll lose? Ragel's eyes met Wu-won's. This guy's eyes. Kim Wu-won. He had heard the name many times. He had thought that the rumors and rankings were exaggerated, but if it was all true, it was really amazing. But the Wu-won he saw in person was even more than the rumors. But still, this was a fight between the two giant guilds, Heaven and the Demon King. No matter how high-ranking a high ranker was, they wouldn't be able to overturn it alone. But why? I need to choose carefully. Years of living as a bat told him. Strangely enough, he couldn't imagine him losing. The Cheonma tournament was just around the corner. During this time, Ball was busier than ever. The Demon King's general. That was his position within the Demon King's army. A pale face as bloodless as a vampire, with clear eyes. Outwardly, he had handsome looks that made it hard to believe he was one of the Demon Kings. Creak. Ball leaned back in his chair. And then. Come in. Bang. The door to Ball's office was smashed open. Shards of the door that had been broken from the outside flew towards Ball's face. Ball did not dodge the shards but faced them head-on. Beyond the broken door, the guy he didn't want to face walked in. What's this? Come in. Thud, thud. Despite his light footsteps, he felt like a giant. Exuding a faint red aura, Diablo approached slowly, one step at a time. I would have come in even if you hadn't said so. Long time no see. Anything you want to say to me? A tone that told him to make an excuse. Ball did not get up from his seat. The difference in rank within the demon tribe was only one, but Diablo was a monster that he couldn't help. Click. He took off the glasses he was wearing and placed them on the desk, pressing his bloodshot eyes. Ball belatedly opened his mouth. Kill me. Swish. Diablo's hand shot forward. At that moment, boom. Ball's head flew off in one piece. Thud. His head flew off, and his body fell backward with the chair. Diablo flicked the blood off his hand and looked at Ball's corpse. I'm glad it's not mushy. His irritation flared up. He had been playing around in Metatron's hands for so long. His pride was hurt and he couldn't stand it. Swish. Diablo turned around and asked the demons frozen outside the office. Where is Behemoth? Chapter 325. Thud, thud. Michael walked through the heavenly castle. Usually, the heavenly castle would be filled with silence, but today, numerous angels were standing by, armed. Lord Michael, please calm down, Lord Michael. Please, get out of the way. Thwack. With the palm of Michael's hand, the angels' bodies were pushed back. One by one, the angels were all rankers with considerable power. They struggled with all their might to not be pushed back by Michael. I can't move. Even if you are Lord Michael, you cannot enter here. Please tell us what is going on. Creak. A blue aura surrounded Michael's eyes. The bodies of the angels whose eyes met his stiffened. Michael approached the angel who stood out the most. Metatron, the guardian angel of the king, Chaffiel. The fact that he was here meant that something had happened that could threaten Metatron's safety. He was prepared for me to come. Come to think of it, it was Metatron who had originally sent a message to Ragel to capture him. He was certainly aware of the problem. Where is Metatron? Michael no longer called Metatron the king. Despite his disrespectful behavior, the angels did not dare to point out Michael's tone. That was how murderous Michael's aura was. Metatron. Bang. Unable to hold back any longer, Michael stamped his foot on the floor and shouted. Come out, Metatron, Metatron. The angels flinched and took a step back at his evil cry. Michael did not point his spear at the angels. Even before, among the angels who had pointed their swords and spears at him, not a single one had lost their lives. But now, Michael seemed ready to kill anyone who dared to block his path. And that was why, we cannot let you go to the Heavenly King. Clank. The angels were prepared to risk their lives. Stop him. This is treason. Summon the archangels. Our opponent is Michael. The heavenly castle became noisy. In order to stop an archangel who was a high ranker, they needed another archangel. Especially since Michael was the most powerful archangel in heaven. They absolutely could not let him meet Metatron. That was what the angels thought. However, all of you, stand back. Clank, bang. The door leading to the king's quarters opened, and Metatron walked out. A momentary silence fell over the noisy castle. An order to stand back. When an order that was the complete opposite of protecting the king who they were supposed to protect came, the angels were unable to do anything. Did you not hear me? Stand back. 1. I see that even you no longer believe my words. At Metatron's words, the angels looked at each other and retreated one by one. In an instant, a path was created between Michael and Metatron. Michael, who had been looking at the angels who had split to the left and right in an unexpected situation, walked towards Metatron. Michael still had his spear in his hand. If he had the chance, he wanted to pierce Metatron's neck right now. But he couldn't do that now. Clang, I heard everything. He was close enough to reach Metatron if he extended his spear. As the distance narrowed, the angels protecting Metatron also became more tense. They had to step in if Michael dared to make a move. What did you hear? Weren't you colluding with the demons and manipulating the celestial demon war? For that purpose, you instructed Ragel to adjust the troops and supplies. Oh my, did the Prime Minister do such a thing? Are you pretending not to know? Michael, the same kind and caring voice as always. In an instant, Michael felt his heart, which had been burning like fire, cool down. When nothing has been confirmed, it pains me that you doubt me and get so worked up. Even at this point, it is certainly my fault that I started the celestial demon war and caused countless angels to die without seeing the end. It is natural that you are angry. Swish. Metatron lowered his head. Michael and the other angels were all taken aback when their king did something that he should never have done. I am sorry, Michael. Your Majesty, why are you bowing your head? Michael, apologize to His Majesty right now. At the angel's cries, Metatron raised his bent back again. Metatron's voice, which continued despite the angel's outcries, spread clearly. If you ask me to pay for my sin, I will gladly accept it. Even the throne and my neck. I will give it all up. A confident tone. Michael's head was filled with confusion. Could it be that I've been wrong all along? What if all of this was planned by Ragel and the Demon King and Metatron had nothing to do with it? What if he had made the wrong judgment and was framing Metatron, who had sacrificed his whole life for the sake of the angels? Such thoughts crossed Michael's mind one by one. And then, you still have a sharp tongue. Pa GGG. Behind Michael, a golden spear flew in. Flash, thud. A long, straight, golden line. It grazed Michael's head and hit Metatron. Your Majesty, what is this? Who is that guy? Michael and the angels turned their gazes back. Slowly. Yuan, who had thrown the spear from afar, walked towards Michael. You've been fooled all this time because you're so stupid. Yuan looked at Michael as if he was pathetic and clicked his tongue. Michael couldn't help but read the meaning in his expression and his face hardened. What? If Metatron really didn't do it, then what was the message that came to Ragel and why are those guys here at this moment? Yuan looked around at the angels. Every single one of them was heavily armed. Only then did Michael open his eyes wide and look as if he had just realized something. Now that he thought about it, that was how it was. In the first place, this whole thing started when he went to Metatron and asked him to stop the heavenly demon war. As if he had been waiting for it, Metatron ordered the angels, including Ragel, to kill Michael. In case that failed, he even had several guardian angels on standby around the heavenly castle. If all of this had nothing to do with Metatron, if he really felt sorry for the angels who had died and was prepared to give up his life to pay for it, he wouldn't have tried to kill Michael, who had asked him to stop the heavenly demon war. Why didn't I realize something so simple? A question that came too late. Yuan's gaze headed towards Metatron, who had been sent flying after being hit by his spear and had collapsed. The king of a race isn't just anyone. What do you mean? Diablo became king with just his overwhelming power. Ruling by power has its limits, and Diablo wasn't interested in being king in the first place. Swish. Yuan's gaze headed towards the angels around him. The angels revealed strong hostility towards him and raised their fighting spirit. Their eyes were slightly twisted. Metatron is different. He became the king of his race not because of his overwhelming power, but because of a skill he gained as he was born as an angel and climbed the tower. A skill, teaching. Thud, thud, thud. Metatron stood up from his spot after cleaning up the debris of the broken wall. That was when Metatron and Yuan's eyes met. That's the name of the skill that guy has. It must be, teaching. Vishnu, he, who had been silent for a while as he guessed Metatron's abilities, opened his mouth. It's the most suitable skill for creating faith. Teaching, it's a skill that forces faith on the opponent. It's a skill that exerts greater power depending on the user's magic power, proficiency, and the strength of their faith. Is Metatron saying he has that skill? I can't be sure, but... Vishnu's gaze headed towards the drawing on the blackboard. Devils and angels. The celestial demonic war that had been repeated for thousands of years. And the angel's blind faith in Metatron. After looking at the record for a while, Vishnu spoke with a face close to being certain. That drawing would never have come out without that skill. Faith didn't just appear out of thin air. Metatron might seem like a holy king on the outside, but his reality was closer to being a tyrant who started the celestial demonic war. He had driven countless angels to their deaths. However, the fact that there hadn't been a single rebellion despite that meant that there had to be another reason. That was why he wondered. Even if it was the most likely possibility, it wasn't certain. But how could it not be? Whoosh. Teaching is resisting, stigma. Resistance failed. Teaching has been weakened. The power of the skill that had been in Michael's eyes weakened. Michael's eyes, which had regained some of his sanity, were filled with anger once more. So, up until now, heaven has been playing around because of one skill. So until now, the heavens have been playing around with a single skill. Did you just realize that now? Thanks to the peace of mind, the skill's effect was weakened, so Michael was no longer being toyed with by Metatron. Fortunately, the power of conversion wasn't working that strongly on Michael. That was because Michael's abilities as the target of the skill were outstanding, and his mental strength was strong. However, that didn't mean that the peace of mind could completely dispel conversion. Even though peace of mind is a higher ranked skill, the difference in proficiency is too great. The consumption of magic power is also too high. Only a few people that he had thought of in advance could have their conversion dispelled. In Michael's case, he had his conversion dispelled from the first time they met. Thanks to that, Michael was able to go to Metatron and ask him to stop the heavenly demon war. The second was Raggle. How do you even know all this? Does the method matter right now? Chuck. Wu Jin looked at the angels who had begun to surround him and Michael. Things have gotten like this. Indeed, all of them were the king's guardian angels, who were rankers. In addition to that, there was also the heavenly king, Metatron. The situation wasn't very good. In time, the army of heaven will probably come this way. Of course. What are you going to do now? Isn't it because of you? I told you to wait a little. What about you? He was puzzled by the sudden change in address, but Michael couldn't ask any more questions. It was true that he had gotten too heated up, and the situation had escalated this quickly because of that. There's only one thing we can do in this situation. What's that? It's not a method that I personally prefer, but... Flash. The interior of the heavenly castle began to fill with purple flames. The air became warm. Wu Jin, who had cast Divine Flame, strode towards Metatron. We'll have to use a show of force. The angels, who felt the ominous amount of magic power, began to move the weapons in their hands, one by one. Some of them were to capture Wu Jin and Michael. The others were to protect Metatron. Wu Jin didn't even spare a glance at those angels. His target was only one person. Metatron, who had raised his body and met Wu Jin's gaze, smiled wickedly. We have to catch the king as quickly as possible. Chapter 326. The archangels gathered in one place. Raphael, Uriel, Ramiel, Sariel, and so on. The archangels were in turmoil now that the great war of the heavenly demons was imminent. Did I mishear something? Uriel, with his snow-white hair fluttering, hurriedly approached Raphael. Raphael, a giant with golden hair, shook his head, clenching his fists. No, you didn't. Why on earth did the king? He said it was treason. Treason, Michael, I don't know the details either. But for now, we have to follow orders. A summons to the heavenly castle. And the eradication of Michael. That was Metatron's order. Following that order, Raphael summoned his troops and the archangels. Even if it was an absurd order, it was the order of the heavenly king. Heaven had to obey his words. The problem must be Kim Yu-won next to him. It was Sariel who spoke after sitting and thinking for a long time. Raphael and Ural's heads turned. Kim Yu-won, I tried to contact him to recruit him to the guild. For some reason, he's been with Michael since yesterday. What did that bastard do to Michael? What can that bastard do to Michael? I think he must have shaken his faith. His faith. Indeed, although he had lost to Zeus, Michael was the highest-ranking high ranker in heaven, aside from Metatron. He was not inferior to anyone in terms of skill, and he was not the kind of person to have his weaknesses exploited. But if that bastard Kim Yu-won was whispering in his ear, there was no other way to understand the rebellion that Michael had raised. But even so, why Michael? Michael's faith was as thick and solid as that of the other archangels. He wouldn't be easily swayed by words, no matter how tempting they were. There was more than one strange thing about this. What are you doing, Raphael? Gulp. While he was lost in thought for a moment, the other archangels were already moving. Raphael came to his senses at the voice calling him. Let's go. Yes, he could figure out the details later. Right now, the biggest problem was that Metatron's safety was in jeopardy because of Michael's rebellion. He would think later. First, I have to subdue Michael. The heavenly castle, the dwelling place of the King of Heaven, the most sublime and holy place above the clouds. It was a place that even ordinary angels could not enter, and they thought of it as the wish of their lives. But right now, crash, a bloody storm blew inside. Ack, a crimson sword blade cut off an angel's wings. The angel, having lost its wings, screamed and fell down. The red line did not stop. Swish, swoosh, slash. An angel who had rushed in was beheaded along with his spear. The angel's body and neck fell to the ground without even a scream. Clang, Yu-won's head turned at the dull sound. Michael, brandishing his spear, was striking down the angels who were rushing in with his spear shaft. Yu-won's brow furrowed. Are you not doing it properly? Thud. Michael's hand holding the spear trembled slightly at Yu-won's provocation. Since the fight had begun, Michael had not killed a single angel. The angels who were manipulated by Metatron. Michael couldn't bring himself to cut their throats. This is not the time to be lenient. I know, but... Swish. Michael looked at the tip of the spear that was stabbing towards him. These guys are being played by Metatron. Bam. Boom. He grabbed the incoming spear with his hand and pulled the angel holding the spear into his arms. Immediately after, Michael's foot kicked the angel's chest. Bang. Ah. A clean move like flowing water. Michael's combat sense was excellent, even in Yu-won's eyes. However, there was something unnecessary in his hands. It was the same just now. Even though he could have cut or stabbed his neck, Michael didn't. It meant that he was thinking once in his head and adjusting his strength in order not to kill his opponent. Are you trying to show mercy? Well, not really. He still seemed to be hesitant. This wasn't something that could be changed in a short period of time. Michael had been sacrificing himself for the heavens his entire life. The angels in his eyes were pitiful beings who were being toyed with by Metatron, and they were not targets to be killed, but lambs to be protected. That's why even now, when he knew it was time to fight, his body wouldn't follow. It couldn't be helped. Can you kill Metatron? Michael's eyes lit up at Yu-won's question. He nodded firmly. Of course. Don't hesitate this time. Waruk. Flames erupted from Yu-won's fingertips. The flames rose above Yu-won's head. The flames, which were not gushing out haphazardly, began to take on a definite shape and soon formed the shape of a giant. Cheonmaryung. Controls, Holy Fire. Waruric. Cheonmaryung demonic spirit, as a vessel that holds the holy fire. And the one who controlled the Cheonmaryung determined its form. And if it was an image of flames, there was the most perfect picture. A giant who wields flames. Surtur. He was the highest-ranking person Yu-won knew who had the greatest fire. His appearance, wielding a flaming sword and facing Odin, was deeply ingrained in Yu-won's mind. And the fire that Surtur desired was in Yu-won's heart. Surtur. Michael's eyes widened as he spotted Yu-won's Cheonmaryung. It was much smaller, but Yu-won's Cheonmaryung definitely resembled Surtur. All it takes is one shot. Warururur. A giant flaming sword was gripped in Cheonmaryung's hand. Heart of Fire is burning. My chest suddenly became hot. The Heart of Fire was an engine that was too powerful for the current Yu-won to handle. It was natural that there would be problems if he forced it to work. But it didn't matter if it was just one shot. Yu-won's eyes turned to Metatron, who was standing behind the angels, using them as shields. The path to reach Metatron, his target. To make that path, Yu-won moved Cheonmaryung. Waik. Run away, run away. No, don't run away. Behind you is the heavenly king. We can't stop this. The angels, overwhelmed by Cheonmaryang, hurriedly gathered their strength. Dozens of guardian angels raised their spears, swords, and shields at once, but the result was disastrous. Pururung, Cheonmaryang's sword fell. The angels were engulfed in flames, and the flames devoured their screams. A path appeared before his eyes. Puruk, Michael's wings spread wide. The next moment, thwack, Michael flew towards Metatron. Metatron, the wind gathered at the tip of the spear. The spear, which was sharper than any other spear, pierced Metatron's neck. At that moment, Metatron's hand stretched out forward. Keying, as if blocked by an invisible wall, Michael's spear stopped in midair. Michael's eyes wavered. The spear hadn't even touched Metatron's hand. How? Do you remember the baptism? Baptism. An event from long ago came to Michael's mind. Thousands of years ago. When Michael was first promoted from an archangel to an angel. I will swear to give my life for the heavens and be loyal to my king. Michael knelt down and swore to Metatron. Duel, Delduel. Michael looked at the tip of his spear that had not reached Metatron. This wasn't blocked by anything. The moment he thrust his spear at Metatron, his arm lost all its strength. Could it be back then? I had no choice. Stab, thud, thud. Quote exclamation mark quote. 3 blades pierced his back and came out of his chest. In addition, Michael's 2 wings were also pierced by another blade. A strong angel like you is a threat to me. From that moment on. Whoosh, thud. Behind Michael, angels flew in, pointing their spears and swords at him. Michael turned around, gnashing his teeth in frustration. Quang, the wind from the spearheads blew the angels away. And at that moment, Metatron's hand reached out towards Michael's exposed back. Swish, a pure white net covered Michael. He hurriedly swung his spear to cut it off, but it only stretched like a tough spider's web, and the net did not break. Among the tactics used by the lower beings of the Murim world, there is one called Cheon La Ji Mang. Cheon La Ji Mang, dragnet. It was a tactic of the Murim world that meant a net that connected heaven and earth. A siege that could never be escaped. However, Metatron only found it funny after hearing about the tactic. Isn't it funny? This is what a real net of heaven looks like. Crunch. Metatron took a step towards Michael. Pure white swords rose one after another around him. Metatron stretched out his hand and grabbed one of them, and was about to swing the sword at Michael who was trapped in the net. Crackle, clang, Metatron's body staggered from a golden lightning bolt that came from somewhere. Michael, who was trapped in the net, turned his head. At the same time, a bright red sword flew in from somewhere. Swish, swish, swish. Thud, thud, thud. The sword, which had been thrust dozens of times, did not even touch a single hair on Michael's body. Even the net that was stuck to his body. It cut only the net precisely. It was a truly ghostly swordsmanship. The heavens are nothing special. Swish. Susanoo pointed the tip of his Kusanagi sword at Michael. To think that such a weakling is the strongest archangel. Even to Susanoo's criticism, Michael could not argue otherwise. It was Yuan who had thrown the lightning and called Susanoo to save him. He himself had done nothing. You keep interfering. Metatron, who had lost Michael, frowned for the first time, his expression unpleasant. It was not just Susanoo. At some point, Arthur and Ares appeared around Yuan and were fighting the other angels. Michael, who had just been released from the net. Yuan looked down at Michael like that and opened his mouth. It seems that I will have to deal with Metatron. For some reason, Michael could not attack Metatron. It seemed that this was also a trick that Metatron had played. You should find out what you need to do from now on. What I need to do? Michael, who made eye contact with Yuan, sighed and nodded his head. How pathetic. What had he done? He was too cowardly to act boldly, and even though he had rushed in to catch Metatron somehow, he ended up like this. The one who was actually doing what he was supposed to do was Yuan. He was so pathetic that he was shivering. Quang. That was when the wall of the heavenly castle was broken. The eyes of everyone, including Yuan and Michael, turned to outside the broken wall. Michael, a thick and resonant voice. Thud, with both fists clenched, a giant angel with golden hair walked into the castle. Raphael, a sense of conviction appeared on Michael's face. The archangels who had entered the heavenly castle. Michael, who had risen from his seat, walked towards them. Chapter 327. Thud, Michael approached. Raphael, along with the other archangels, looked at him in surprise. They had heard the news, but they couldn't believe that Michael had actually rebelled. What are you doing? I'm going to put everything back where it belongs. What nonsense are you talking about? The war of the heavenly demons must be stopped. Whoosh, bang, Raphael's fist shot towards Michael. The shock wave that extended from his fist dented the floor of the heavenly castle. Michael frowned as he raised his arm to block Raphael's fist. You're still as hasty as ever. Archangel Raphael. In terms of skill alone, he was second only to Michael in heaven. He was a formidable opponent, even for Michael. Moreover, Raphael's personality was not easygoing enough to allow for a leisurely conversation. I have no choice but to be hasty. Whoosh, bang. Two fists and a spear collided. Michael's spear was no longer hesitant. Raphael realized this fact from a single clash. I see you're confident. Yes, I agree with what you said. Whoosh, Raphael's fist was imbued with mana. But even so, you should have believed me. The moment his fist pierced Michael's afterimage, Michael's spear struck Raphael's chest. Bang, is it so hard to believe something that is clearly wrong? Swoosh, whoosh, Michael moved amidst the wind. Raphael could not see the tip of Michael's spear. As a fellow archangel, and secretly a rival, he had sparred with him countless times, but this was the first time he had seen such a fast spear. You're the one who needs to wake up. A spear flew towards his chest. He crossed his arms in an instant to block it, but it was too late. Bang, cuck, a strong shockwave spread throughout his body as if it were being pierced. Raphael was overwhelmed by the shock as he was pushed back. Was the gap this big? He was sure that if he had just reached out a little further, he would have been able to touch him. He had thought that the difference in ranking was only due to the merits Michael had accumulated so far, and that the difference in skill was not that great. Raphael's goal was Michael, the strongest archangel. That title was the reason Raphael had trained himself relentlessly all his life. But why, how, flash, faith in the heavenly king is the reason we angels exist. Crack, crack, Raphael's muscles swelled up, a high ranker with a large build comparable to Hercules. Raphael also had a skill that amplified his strength, though not as much as gigantification. Your actions are inexcusable and are a clear act of rebellion, Michael. Whoosh, a tremendous wave of mana surged from Raphael. The other angels could not approach him because of it. Raphael intended to give it his all this one time. You always wanted to defeat me. All of this was a technique to defeat him. Michael was not so oblivious that he did not know that Raphael had been training to defeat him, considering how much time they had spent together. It was a little over 200 times. That's how many times you lost to me in our spars. Thud, Michael approached Raphael. We always had close matches. As if you were about to win, or as if I was about to win. Raphael looked at Michael, who was approaching him head-on, with a puzzled expression. At least in terms of strength, he had always been ahead. He could not understand why Michael was fighting him head-on in such an important battle. But you never defeated me once. The tip of the spear moved. Whoosh, he instinctively countered with his fist. Clang, quote exclamation mark quote, Raphael's arm was knocked up. His body swayed for a moment, and he lost his balance. Thud, if our skills were truly similar, wouldn't there have been a different outcome at least once? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? Whiz, Michael's whine tore through Raphael's energy. Raphael, taken aback, thrust his fist towards Michael. At that moment, Raphael's body floated upwards. Boom, Raphael's body was slammed into the ground. The floor of the heavenly castle caved in, and Raphael's body was thrown underground. Now wake up from your dream. Please. Swoosh, Michael's gaze turned towards the other angels. The wall of the heavenly castle that Raphael had broken through. Outside, he could see angels forming an army. I would like to ask you not to interfere. If you do interfere. Crack, Michael clenched the shaft of his spear so tightly that his hand ached, and he made up his mind. I will kill you all. He was the one who had started this fight. Hesitating to fight in this situation was nothing more than evading responsibility due to guilt. He clearly understood the situation. Michael glanced at Uriel and Metatron fighting. We can't solve this fight among ourselves. He couldn't attack Metatron. And that was probably the same for the other angels. Now, he had no choice but to seek outside help. Please. Uriel looked at Metatron, who had distanced himself. Metatron, who had flown up through the ceiling, crossed his arms and looked down at Uriel. Don't you intend to fight? After the fight began. Metatron had never once attacked Uriel. He had only continued to evade his attacks. The fight wasn't even happening in the first place, so Uriel was gradually losing his patience. Is there no need to fight directly? Flap, several angels blocked Metatron's path. There are so many people protecting me like this. Step aside, Your Majesty. We will stop him here. Uriel and Ramael, several angels, including the two archangels, protected Metatron. No matter how skilled Michael was, he was alone. He couldn't stop all the angels who were gradually growing in number with one hand. I'm fine. Uriel turned his head at Metatron's reply. But, this is my home, a resolute voice. Shouldn't I protect it? The angels nodded at his words. I understand, if that is what your majesty says. We will drive out the intruder. Uriel laughed in disbelief at their conversation. It was a truly blind faith. Behavior stemming from the fact that they were doing the right thing. None of them wondered why Michael had done such a thing. That's too bad. Uriel turned his head at the voice from behind him. An archangel with curly, pale yellow hair and a pure white uniform. It was a face he had seen somewhere. Was it surreal? Long time no see. He was the angel who had come to recruit Uriel to heaven during the Muram Grand Tournament. Of course, Uriel had refused his offer, and Surreal had left without much regret. It wasn't a very memorable encounter, but the reunion was like this. It was not a very welcome situation. I don't know what happened, but we can't disobey the King of Heaven's orders. Unlike his polite tone, Surreal's eyes, which held a pure white sword, were filled with intense hostility. Excuse me. Just like that, the moment Surreal stepped towards Uriel. Excuse me. Crackle. Shards of pure white ice swept towards Surreal. Surreal, who turned his body, hurriedly swung his sword. A dazzling beam of light and ice collided, and the shards of ice shattered, losing their power. Not far away, Surreal could see the one who had attacked him. I wish you had done that. Excuse me to me. Arthur. He walked towards Surreal with Excalibur in his hand. The ground beneath his feet froze and turned into a pure white ice rink. A tough opponent. Surreal approached Arthur, complaining as if it were difficult. Soon, the two swords clashed. Some of the angels who had been guarding Metatron began to surround U1. The situation changed rapidly. U1 looked up at the sky above the ceiling where Metatron had broken through and muttered. The real fight begins now. The angels aimed their bows at once. Magic arrows rained down from above. Bang! Yuan's arm moved in a fan shape. Blue drops of water appeared along his hand and wrapped around Yuan's body. Splash, splash, splash. The rain of arrows was blocked by a curtain of water. Right after the rain of arrows had stopped. Not yet. Screech. It's not over. Boom. A giant arrow of light more powerful than all the arrows that had been fired before. The arrow of Archangel Uriel, who had destroyed the castle of the demon realm several times, was shot towards Yuan's head. However, clang, Uriel's arrow was blocked by a giant hand before it could reach Yuan. Heavenly Demon's commandment. Whoosh. A giant of flames protecting Yuan's body. Uriel frowned at the sight of the giant and prepared his bow again. What an annoying technique. Screech. The battle between the angels intensified. Michael was fighting against several archangels, and so was Yuan. However, the opponent was heaven. The power of a huge guild. Not to mention the difference in numbers, there were archangels, who were high rankers, in heaven. A fight that they could never win. But why? Something's strange. Metatron felt uneasy for some reason. He doesn't seem that desperate. U1 and Michael were in a position where they couldn't afford to waste time. To prevent Michael's rebellion, Metatron had called in all the archangels and legion-level angels. Even now, more angels would be gathering. Olympus, Heaven, and even Muspelheim. Yuan, who had turned several large guilds upside down, wouldn't be foolish enough not to know that. Why? Instead, Metatron felt more and more uneasy as time passed. And this feeling had never been wrong before. Swish. That was when U1 looked up at the sky. The action had been repeated several times. Metatron suddenly thought that there might be a reason for that action. As expected, I don't feel like fighting either. Yuan, who had been saving his words since the fight began, finally spoke up. U1 spoke to Michael. He said that there was only one way to win this fight. They had to catch the king as soon as possible. Half of it was true, and the other half was false. It was true that the fight would end if they caught the king. However, that wasn't all there was to winning. I gave up halfway when you said you'd catch me, Michael. U1 didn't like a fight where there was only one way to win in the first place. That's why I prepared insurance. Metatron realized that Yuan's eyes weren't looking at him. The color reflected in Yuan's eyes. Metatron looked up at the sky above his head for the first time. And at that moment, for the first time, the smile on Metatron's face disappeared. Why already? Metatron's eyes saw the sky, which was slowly turning red. There was only one meaning to this sky. The heavenly demon war will begin in 10 minutes. The fight between the sky and the Demon King, which had been repeated hundreds of times. It meant that the Heavenly Demon War was just around the corner. Chapter 328. At that time, the relationship between the Demon King and Heaven was not as bad as it is now. It couldn't be called good, but it wasn't a relationship of hate like it is now, as if they wanted to kill each other. Asterisk. Wung, 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 wung. The magic power fluctuated and the ground shook noisily under his feet. Raggle muttered in front of the building filled with blue light. I really messed up. An enormous amount of magic power that an individual could not possess. It was no wonder. In the first place, this phenomenon did not occur because of the player's skill. The authority to use the warp gate belongs to the Heavenly King. Angels guarding the gate collapsed around Raggle, who was looking down at the warp gate. If the balance that was tilting to one side anyway. Wong, wong wong, the gate began to turn red. It would be better to stick to the tilted side. The warp gate is activated. The ceiling was filled with magic power. The coordinates of the warp gate were already known to Yuan. He doubted his ears for a moment after hearing the coordinates, but he couldn't ignore them. If all of Yuan's words were true. As someone who had held Metatron's hand and manipulated the Heavenly Demon War for a long time, he had no choice. The Demon King will be here soon. Demon King, a huge guild of demons centered around Diablo. Like Heaven, they had also been preparing for the Heavenly Demon War. Now that Michael has risen up, the balance of the Heavenly Demon War has already collapsed anyway. Baal must have been purged by now. It was himself and Baal who maintained the balance of the Heavenly Demon War. The two, the Prime Minister of Heaven and the Demon King's military, adjusted troops and supplies so that the Heavenly Demon War could end at an appropriate point. However, Baal had been purged, and Raggle was also in a situation where he could not move as usual. To add to that, there was Michael's rebellion. The situation was much different than usual. What will happen if the Heavenly Demon War takes place at a time like this? The balance that had been maintained for a long time had been broken. If he had to make a choice, it was natural to stick to the more advantageous side. Raggle looked at the warp gate that had started operating. Welcome, Creek. Raggle knelt down. Oh, King of Demons. SSSKUK. Someone began to walk out from the bright halo of the warp gate. A tall man with fiery red hair and a strong jawline. Just one appearance, and the sky turned red. The phenomenon and the face were familiar. Demon King Diablo, the pinnacle of the Demon Kings, and a high ranker ranked 14th. Raggle gulped and tensed up at the appearance of such a Diablo. Raggle, your face has gotten a lot better. A rough tone like a street vendor. It was the complete opposite of Metatron, the King of Angels. I didn't know I'd see you again like this. Me neither. That bloody guy really. Swoosh. Diablo's hand reached over Raggle's head. You've grown a lot. You've even become Prime Minister. It had been thousands of years since Raggle had risen to the Prime Minister of Heaven. However, the first meeting between the two was long before that. At that time, the relationship between the Demon King and Heaven wasn't as bad as it is now. It wasn't good either, but it wasn't a relationship of hatred like it is now, as if they wanted to kill each other. Raggle shuddered at the large palm covering his head. It's natural to be scared when you've committed a sin. Diablo looked down at Raggle, who was trembling before his eyes. That guy said you could live. Quack. Surprised by the evil energy squeezing his head, Raggle grabbed Diablo's hand. Kiuuau. It felt like his skull would shatter and his brain would be crushed at any moment. His eyes widened in pain, and Diablo's face filled his vision. Keep your promise. I really hate liars. Wong, wong wong. The warp gate emitted light. Following Diablo, the rankers on the Demon King's side began to cross the gate one by one. Still, swish. Diablo's hand grabbed Raggle's wing. Raggle realized what he was about to do right away. Ah, no, quack. His wing was torn off by the force of his grip. Raggle's scream rose into the sky. The pain of having his wing torn off while he was alive was painful, but for an angel, their wings were more precious than their arms and legs. I understand this much resentment. Baal's head exploded in an instant, so don't feel too sorry for yourself. Thud. As Diablo released his hand, Raggle's body collapsed to the floor. The other Demon Kings followed behind Diablo as he strode forward. There's no such thing as a bloodless entry. It's a bit earlier than expected, but is that okay? The administrator will take care of it. Well, what could possibly go wrong? The excited Demon Kings each made up their minds and raised their fighting spirit. As the Demon King's army crossed the gate, the sky turned red. As expected, the Celestial Demon War will begin in 10 minutes. The administrator, who had been watching the situation, immediately announced the start of the Celestial Demon War. There was no more time to spare. Let's finish this once and for all. Celestial Demon War. Why now, all of a sudden? Could it be that the demons are here? The fierce battle stopped, and the stadium fell into a brief lull. A familiar message and situation. 10 minutes until the start of the Celestial Demon War. That meant that the Demon King's forces had arrived in heaven. Is this your doing? Metatron broke the silence. Even at this moment, time continued to flow without stopping. So this is the insurance you were talking about. Sighing, Yu-1 looked back at Michael. But thanks to that hothead, it didn't work out. But that didn't work because of that rash guy. Diablo. One by one from the inside. Were you trying to shake my position? Yes. Why did you have to go through such a difficult path? Metatron tilted his head as if he couldn't understand. Shaking Metatron's position from within heaven, centering around Michael, and driving him out. That was the picture Eugene had drawn when he first entered heaven. It would take time, and he would have to borrow the strength of several archangels, including Ragel. But that was only a problem between heaven and the Demon King. The simplest way, after all, was to find Ragel and Baal, destroy the balance, and cause a war. You don't seem like the type of person who would have a hero complex. It's because of the indoctrination. What do you mean? There is such a thing. The reason he had to go around in such a complicated way. Eugene didn't prefer to take such a difficult path either. However, if possible, we should avoid a full-scale war between heaven and the Demon King. Odin, the self-proclaimed #1 pacifist, insisted on not shedding too much blood. Listen to me, if we can just get Michael on our side, we can solve the rest within heaven. I should have just done it my way from the beginning. If he had, he wouldn't have had to go around in circles like this or take risks. The Demon King's forces were about the same as heaven's. No, maybe even more. The problem was getting Diablo, who had lost interest in the Sky Demon War, out. That problem could be solved by finding Baal. Because there was no emotion that could provoke anger as easily as betrayal. It's a bit roundabout, but the board is set. The method was different, but the goal was the same. The Sky Demon War was a fight that had to end. The longer it continued, the more the power of angels and demons would steadily decrease, and as a result, both sides would perish together. Ironically, however, the surest way to end this fight was the Sky Demon War itself. Metatron looked around. 2 archangels had fallen at Michael's hands. More archangels were injured, and there were many casualties among the angel rankers. It was not good to clash with the Demon King in this situation. Furthermore, it was not a full-scale war as usual, but a situation where the Demon King had infiltrated the depths of heaven. Not good. The end of the Sky Demon War should be a magnificent explosion. But now, it was just a small-scale fight, with only the name of the Sky Demon War. His head became complicated. If he wanted to plan for the future here, he had to hurry up and get out of the way. If he wanted to fight, he would have to face Diablo with Michael, but that was a losing battle. So in the end, I surrender. He didn't fight a fight he couldn't win. If he couldn't win, he would lose cleanly and wait for the next one. That was Metatron's motto. However, I refuse. Thud. Sometimes, there were opponents that didn't work on. Long time no see. Diablo. The Mao Diablo. Metatron's longtime rival, a high ranker who had stood firm as the leader of the Mao. With murderous intent, he set foot in the Sky Castle. Who dares to surrender? As soon as those words fell. Over there. Metatron is over there. Today is the end of the tiresome heavenly demon war. The sound of the Mafeet army climbing up to the Sky Castle could be heard. The angels trembled in fear. The situation had reached the worst possible outcome that Metatron could think of. Diablo was the one person he absolutely should not have encountered. This isn't a very pleasant situation. Yes, you don't want to fight, do you? That's why you've only sent your underlings forward. Crack, crack. Cracking his knuckles, Diablo approached Metatron. Every time the Heavenly Demon War starts, you disappear somewhere. I could barely catch a glimpse of you because you were hiding so well, but now I've finally found you. Metatron had always hidden himself and not participated in the Heavenly Demon War. Because of that, Diablo, who had been aiming to capture Metatron, had naturally lost interest in the Heavenly Demon War. I've been wanting to see you so badly, but surrender. Don't be ridiculous. Must I really see the end of this? Yes. With that answer, Diablo stopped walking. And very thoroughly, too. The Heavenly Demon War will begin in 5 minutes. 5 minutes until the start of the Heavenly Demon War. The moment he heard that message, Metatron realized why Diablo, with his short temper, wasn't taking any action. The Heavenly Demon War was a battle that ended when the opposing faction's king was captured. If the Heavenly Demon War started and either Metatron or Diablo were to die, the battle would naturally end. In other words, Diablo was waiting for the start of the Heavenly Demon War, which was recognized by the system. I've come this far, after all. Diablo and Metatron faced each other. Originally, this was supposed to be the extent of Yuan's role. The Heavenly Demon War is a war between demons and angels. The victor takes everything from the loser, and the loser loses everything. But here's the thing. The Heavenly Demon War, the fact that the battle didn't end in a huge clash was exactly the ideal outcome that they had planned. If we can avoid a major clash in that battle and capture only Metatron, then perhaps the Mao and the Sky can become one even greater guild. The Mao and the Sky, two of the largest guilds in the tower, would merge into one. That was a more perfect picture than just driving out Metatron and preserving the power of the Sky and the Mao. However, that was something that ultimately depended on Diablo. Right now, Yuan had his own concerns. The problem is this. The Heavenly Demon War will begin in 3 minutes. Contribution: 0. After the end of the Heavenly Demon War, rewards will be given according to contribution. After the end of the Heavenly Demon War, the rankings within the demon realm will change according to contribution. Contribution: a score that could only be earned by the demons and angels who were qualified to participate in the Heavenly Demon War. Somehow, Yuan had become a participant in the Qianma War. Chapter 329. The Heavenly Demon War was a festival for angels and demons. Angels killed demons, and demons killed angels to earn contribution points. And there were 2 ways to officially participate in the event. Become an angel or a demon, or join a guild. Of course, Yuan wasn't thinking about participating in the Heavenly Demon War. Becoming an angel or a demon was out of the question, and he wasn't considering joining a guild either. But unexpectedly, he got a chance. It was because of the demonic body. This is, Yuan looked around at Diablo and Metatron facing each other, and the demons and angels. Should I get greedy? 10 minutes. All of the given time had passed. The Heavenly Demon War will begin. The system sounded, signaling the start, and Diablo gave the signal. Kill them all. Let's start. Capture Metatron. Kill the angels. The demons roared. In an instant, the stadium was filled with magic power. The sky had already turned red a long time ago, and the demons ran towards the angels with eyes gleaming with murderous intent. Metatron also gave an order. Do your best. His voice was calm, but it was filled with determination and will. An order to fight to the death. However, none of the angels hesitated. Clang, stab, swish, spears and claws clashed, and blood splattered. In the midst of it all, Diablo's eyes were fixed on only one person. Metatron. That's how Diablo took a step closer to Metatron. Protect the Heavenly King. Your Majesty, take your place. Thwack. In the meantime, the bodies of several angels who had stepped in between were torn into dozens of pieces. A gesture without hesitation. It felt less like killing and more like swatting away a fly or mosquito that was buzzing around in front of his eyes. There was no reason to stop. That's when Metatron's wings spread out. Flap. Like a peacock spreading its wings, Metatron's wings, which had been folded, spread wide, much longer than any other angel or archangel. Are you showing off? Thud. Boom. Diablo's fist hit Metatron in the head. At that moment, a ray of light burst out of Metatron's body. Crash. Bam bam. The shattered form of Metatron turned into pure white feathers and scattered. Diablo turned his head abruptly, no longer feeling anything in his hand. Where do you think you're going? Swoosh. A hand stretched out in a straight line. In the midst of the scattered white feathers, Diablo's hand grabbed Metatron by the scruff of the neck. Snap. Quote. The feathers that had been clouding his vision disappeared, and Diablo thrust his head towards Metatron. I can't see you, but I can feel you. Bam. Diablo's other hand slammed into Metatron's face. The angels who were watching the scene screamed in protest, but they were already overwhelmed just by holding back the demons that had invaded the heavenly castle. Diablo, who had just blown off Metatron's head, muttered with a look of dissatisfaction. He's such an annoying bastard, no matter when I see him. Flutter. In the midst of the now pure white landscape. At some point, they had been trapped in a space completely cut off from the outside world. And then, as Diablo was trapped, Metatron's voice reached his ears. Don't you understand? The scattered feathers tickled his face as they passed by. All sound had disappeared except for Metatron's voice. I can't defeat you, but I won't support you either. Diablo remembered how many times he had been hit with this skill. Metatron and Diablo. This skill was the reason why the two kings representing each race had not been able to reach a conclusion until now. Sanctuary of gods and humans. A severance from the world. Originally, it was a skill that meant a space where humans could meet gods. Metatron's skill was befitting of his position as the king of angels. Among the angels, this skill was known to be used by Metatron to allow the chosen ones to meet the gods. However, the actual use of the skill was different from what was known. Are you running away again? Isn't the peace and tranquility of heaven more important than your pride? What a load of crap. Diablo didn't know if there really was a god, but he had been trapped here several times. He had expected this to happen. He didn't think Metatron, who had come face to face with him, would fight him head-on. He was sure that he would try to avoid the fight in some way. This space existed for that very reason. Metatron had forcibly cut Diablo off from the outside using his skill. I knew you'd do this again. And that was why. Womb. Diablo had prepared enough for this situation. This time will be different. Kwa'u. Magic gathered in Diablo's hand and shone like a red bead. Diablo was the king of the demons. He had been the king of the demonic world for thousands of years, and during that long time, no one in the demonic world had surpassed Diablo. Truly overwhelming power. Nevertheless, Diablo had not slacked off on his training for a single day during that long time. That was why, just this once. I'll crush it in one blow. Even this annoying space, he would definitely be able to blow it away. Crunch. It was then that he felt a presence. Quote. You won't be able to crush it. Diablo turned his head and saw Wu Yun. Diablo saw him approaching from the side and asked, retracting the magic he had gathered in his hand. How did you get in? I walked. Are you joking? I'm not joking, I'm serious. Knock, knock. Wu Yun pointed to his eyes as he answered. Only then did Diablo realize how Wu Yun had entered this place. The Eye of Truth. The Eye of Truth had the power to see the invisible and to pierce through the truth. Rumor had it that it also had the power to foresee the near future. Thanks to that, I came in at the same time as you were about to be hit by this skill. You won't be able to crush it. You seem so confident, so you must have another way. This isn't a skill that can be crushed in the first place. You'll only get tired if you try to cause a riot. Nonsense. There's no skill in the world that can't be destroyed. That's right, there's no such skill. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Wu Yun felt a slight sensation at the tip of his foot. A breath smaller than a mosquito. A minimized heartbeat. The blink of an eye. Sensory zone is activating. Wu Yun's head turned. Every skill has a way to be destroyed. This skill is no different. Wa'aruk. A blank, white background with nothing on it. A faint, opaque shape appeared on it. Eye of Truth reveals its essence. Sutsu. The cold ring in his hand changed shape. Uranus, which had changed into the shape of a long spear, began to devour Yuan's mana and emit a fearsome electric shock. Diablo, who was next to him, thought that Yuan was about to use some kind of skill. But as time went on, his eyes grew wider and wider. What the hell is this? Paget, Pgggg. The spear, which had grown to be as tall as Yuan, was emitting enough mana to make Diablo's skin tingle. His instincts were telling him, that spear is dangerous. Heart of Uranus's transforms into lightning bolt. After the test of Uranus, Yuan had tried several times to change the shape of Uranus to test the item's performance. Emitting an electric shock, creating lightning. He also changed the shape of the ring into a sword and into armor. And among them, the best performer was this lightning bolt. Quack. Yuan put strength into his hand holding the lightning bolt and pulled his body back like a bow. A posture for a javelin throw. The blurry figure seen in the Wan Jiamzheng began to move slowly. Once it started moving, the figure quickly became clear. A struggle to escape. Pgg. Wan Jiamzheng lights the way. But it was useless. You can't escape. Wan Jiamzheng was not a great skill with just a single skill. Unlike the top-ranked S-rank skill, the skill's effect couldn't even kill an ant. Nevertheless, Wan Jiamzheng was an S-rank skill. There was one reason. It was because it had the best supporting ability in situations like this. And in Wan Jiamzheng, he could clearly see Metatron, who was hiding over there, and where Metatron was trying to escape to. Tukwick. Lightning flew from Yuan's hand. A fast-flying spear. Quote. Borrowing the power of the skill, Metatron, who had been hiding, revealed himself. He hurriedly crouched down, using his wings as a shield. Zing! That was the moment when the lightning struck Metatron's body. Cheek! Ziojuk! A crack appeared on the pure white background where Yuan and Diablo were. Kwachang-chang! The space that Metatron had created shattered like shards of glass. The battlefield reappeared. As Metatron and Diablo appeared, the angels and demons stopped for a moment to look at them. Metatron, who had been struck by lightning, staggered. A hole had appeared in his wings, which were like a symbol of angels. His body, which was momentarily paralyzed due to the remaining effects of the electric shock, did not listen to him. What power is this? He had clearly blocked it, but the shock was transmitted to the inside of his wings. It was like being hit head-on by Zeus's thunderbolt in his prime. It took time to control his body. However, Diablo would not let that happen. Swish, ack, his neck was caught. Diablo, who had broken the skill, hurriedly grabbed Metatron by the back of the neck, so that he could never escape. Metatron, who had staggered after being hit by Yuan's spear, could not resist the force of his powerful grip. I finally caught you. Crack, the force of his grip tightened around his windpipe. Ack, cough, he tried to cry out in pain, but it was no use. Diablo would not let this moment, which he had longed for, slip away. He had to get out of this. Metatron squeezed his strength and raised his hand. Then, Your Majesty, save His Majesty, Your Majesty. The angels who had been fighting in various places turned around and rushed to save Metatron. Don't interfere. Bang, magical energy erupted in all directions, centered on Diablo. Boom, it was just a gesture, but the angels who had rushed in fell powerlessly to the floor like moths flying into a fire. Diablo did not even glance at those angels. In his eyes, only Metatron, who was caught in his hand, was reflected. It's been too long, for both of us. Crackle, with one hand, he grabbed his neck, and with the other, he made a fist. A fist filled with magical energy. Diablo had been waiting for this one shot, and waiting for it. Let's end this now, this annoying bastard, and just as Diablo's fist was about to blow Metatron's head off. Swish, boom, a spear flew from somewhere and pierced Metatron's heart. Chapter 330. The astonished angels opened their mouths wide, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Diablo, who was holding Metatron's lifeline in his hand, was equally surprised. Rip, rip, rip. One black spear was stabbed into Metatron's chest. Diablo turned his head in the direction from which it had flown. My apologies. Yuan was standing there. It was not a real spear. It was merely a clump of magical energy that had been shaped using the power of lightning. However, Metatron, who was being held in Diablo's hand, could not resist even such a weak blow. Furthermore, it had accurately pierced his heart. Heavenly King, Metatron, has died. Heaven is now part of the Demon King. Henceforth, when the angels attack the demons, there will be restrictions on the use of magical energy. The demons will have a strong resistance to the angels' attacks. Contribution points are being calculated. Rewards will be given based on contribution points after 24 hours. The celestial demonic war has ended. A game that had lost its king could no longer continue. The celestial demonic war was over. And just like that, the demon king ascended to the heavens. The celestial demonic war had ended. The demons tried to get their claws on the morning angels. However, stop it. Diablo put an end to their actions. The fight is over. What's the point of killing those who have already been defeated? The battlefield was already over. Diablo welcomed a fight with the strong, but he had no interest in bullying those who had no will to fight or were much weaker than him. That was why Yuan had not been worried about the aftermath of the celestial demonic war. Aren't you going to leave? Scram, surrendering to absolute power. Diablo's orders were no different from law to the demons. There was no retaliation against the angels. The battlefield was cleaned up just like that. Thud, Michael approached Diablo. Diablo, who had been feeling a little down after the fight, perked up and showed interest. Even Diablo knew of Michael's strength. Thank you for stepping down like this. Heaven is now on our side anyway. There's no need to bother with it anymore. It's not like I don't know the situation. He had found out that the celestial demonic war had been manipulated all along through the information he had received from Yuan and Baal. And after hearing the news, all Diablo wanted to do was end this lousy fight as soon as possible. What are you going to do now? I was under Metatron's skill. A skill, it was called conversion. It was called IC. Diablo's gaze turned to Yuan, who was yawning with a tired expression on his face. Did you hear that from that guy again? Yes. Does he know the future or something? He had always thought that Yuan knew a lot. But this was just too much. It had been the same during Ragnarok, and it was the same this time. For thousands of years, the two races of angels and demons had been unable to resolve the celestial demonic war, but Yuan had resolved it all too easily. His true identity was once again a source of curiosity. He was simply too outstanding. Well, he's helping us anyway. He had been a little annoyed by the fact that he had intercepted Metatron. But in the end, Yuan had made a greater contribution to capturing Metatron. He had created this game board, broken Metatron's skills that he himself had been unable to break. And he had even cut off Metatron's airway. Yuan had done it all himself. Now that Metatron is dead, the effects of his skill will disappear, so you'll be able to open your eyes. Ragel is still alive. Whether you find evidence or persuade the other archangels, I think it's time to correct the mistakes that have been made. Yeah, work hard, Diablo replied in an indifferent voice, as if telling him to do whatever he wanted. His interest lay elsewhere. I wanted to fight you in a better situation, but things turned out like this. Archangel Michael. Just as the Demon King was Diablo, there was an archangel in heaven. Michael's abilities were so highly regarded that such a story existed. They had fought countless times, but they had never reached a proper conclusion. War was not a personal fight. The two of them had always fought on a chaotic battlefield, and the celestial demonic war had ended before they could finish. In the first place, it was impossible for the two of them, who were the core forces of each faction, to die in such a war. I'm sorry it had to end like this. Well, there will be another chance. Now was not the time to worry about fighting Diablo. A country that has lost its king is bound to collapse. Heaven and the Demon King had become one. He had no regrets, as he had known this would happen and had acted accordingly. Michael looked up at the sky, which had turned completely red as he escaped from the ruined heavenly castle. I'll be very busy from today onwards. Yuan returned to the demon army's base camp with Diablo. It took almost a day to clean up the battlefield. Diablo, who had finished cleaning up to some extent, called Yuan to his barracks. Once Yuan sat across from him, Diablo spoke first. You really did something. As if he was tired of hearing the same thing over and over again, Yuan nodded and said. I guess I'll have to refrain from drinking beverages made with the blood of angels now. It's not like I enjoyed drinking it, so giving it up is nothing. What are you going to do about managing the angels? Once things settle down, I'm going to leave it to Michael. That guy's the best at what he does. I guess he can't shake off his obsession with being the best. Rather than having him run around between this side and that without any direction, wouldn't it be better to let him do what he's always done? In short, it meant that it was easier to let him do what he had always done. But he had to be satisfied with that much. However, he had to be content with that much. Having acquired a demonic body, he was a human who had set foot in the demonic race, and in terms of rank, he was next to Behemoth. However, he had to be content with that much. Having acquired a demonic body, he was a human who had set foot in the demonic race, and in terms of rank, he was next to Behemoth. The heavens were already incorporated into the Demon King. The system divided the up and down relationship between angels and demons, and as a result, compatibility between the races was born. In the future, there would be no angels surpassing demons. If Diablo, the king of the demons, harbored evil intentions, the heavens would be engulfed in a bloody storm. For now, he had to think of Diablo's embrace of the heavens as fortunate. Anyway, this is the end of the boring fight. Diablo leaned back in his barracks chair. There wasn't much he had to do, but for some reason, fatigue washed over him. A fight that had lasted half his life. He couldn't believe it had ended like this. Well, this guy has finished an even bigger fight than this. Ragnarok, the war between Asgard, the strongest guild in the tower, and Muspelheim. Yuan had contributed to starting that war, and as a result, he had thrown Odin's and cut off Surtur's breath. Furthermore, Yuan's abilities at the time were incomparable to what they were now. I never thought he'd come this far in such a short amount of time. He was surprised every time he saw him. Diablo himself had also grown up hearing the word, genius, and quickly became a ranker and became the Demon King. However, this was the first time he had seen someone become so strong at such a fast pace. An existence beyond common sense. He had seen many high rankers, but this was the first time he had ever thought this. He must never become an enemy of this guy. Did you plan to use the warp gate from the beginning? I didn't want to use it. But I thought of it as insurance. Using Ragel to open a gate connecting the garrison of heaven and the Demon King's army. And in order to use it, the Demon King's forces had to be prepared in advance. To that end, Yuan first sought out the Demon King's army. That's how he fought a ranking battle with Behemoth, the main force leading the Demon King's army, and made him gather the Demon King's army. Just in case, he could use the Demon King's army to his advantage. I must admit that you have an extraordinary mind. Just my mind, your abilities are. Diablo recalled Yuan and Metatron's fight for a moment and nodded. You've become quite useful. Diablo was not the type to speak empty words. Yuan was satisfied with this much of an answer. It was that difficult to receive Diablo's approval. We happen to have a vacant military position. The commander-in-chief of the demon world. The Demon King's second-in-command, Baal. He was purged by Diablo in this heavenly demon war. Metatron, Ragal, and his collusion to manipulate the heavenly demon war were sins that could never be forgiven. The seat that became vacant like that. There's no one smart. Behemoth is just a big piece of meat. Belial is somewhat useful, but he's not noticeable. Are you asking me to take that position? Yeah, come to the Demon King. You can take the second-in-command position. You're qualified enough. Yuan was the main character of this heavenly demon war. Having obtained a demonic body, he was now both human and a demon, and in terms of rank, he was next only to Behemoth. Perhaps his contribution to this heavenly demon war would be calculated and his rank would rise above Behemoth's. However, I refuse. Diablo had known for a long time that Yuan was not the kind of guy who would belong anywhere. If Yuan were to join anywhere, he would have put his name on Asgard. But still, he was tempted. That was why he had talked more than he should have. If you put your name on the Demon King, I'll move with you when you're in danger. I can help you if you need strength. I know, but why? There was no answer. He didn't seem to be thinking. Silence was a refusal. Diablo smacked his lips in regret. Okay, well, then, creak. Yuan thought the conversation was over and pulled back the chair he was sitting on and got up. I'm going first. I'm a little tired. Oh, wait. Why, do you know? What? Why did Metatron do such a thing? He had learned the inside story, but the most important thing was missing in this fight. Surely Metatron, the king of the angels, should have wanted heaven to win. However, he had persuaded Baal at best and did not try to win the fight, but rather continued to lead to a draw. Why on earth? Metatron's actions, whose purpose was unknown, left a lingering sense of unease. Because you guys are too strong. Because we're strong. Demons and angels are born with much stronger powers than humans from birth. Demons and angels, the races that were born with strong powers from birth, next to the dragons and giants. Nevertheless, the dominant species of this tower, with a far greater number than the dragons and giants. The potential of the two races was something that even the guys outside would be wary of. In the long run, they weakened their strength. Outside, Diablo's eyes sparkled at the word. Outside, what the hell, who are those guys? I don't know either. You don't know, that's why I'm finding out now. In other words, we've been led by the nose. That's right. Ha ha, he couldn't help but laugh in disbelief. Yuan looked at Diablo, who was glaring with blood-red eyes, trying to suppress his anger. He looked like he was about to explode if he was provoked. Diablo's current state was like a volcano holding boiling lava. While Diablo was suppressing his anger without being able to find a target. Come to think of it, it's almost 24 hours now. Time flowed like water, and the time for settlement was approaching. 24 hours have passed. Rewards will be given according to the contribution to the heavenly demon war. Contribution, 1 million P. The rank of the demon realm rises. 1 million points acquired. You have obtained the highest contribution. Additional rewards will be given according to contribution. Acquired the title 12th Demon King. Chapter 331. The rewards for the heavenly demon competition have been calculated. The points for contribution were also considerable. They were giving 1 point for every 1 contribution point. It was quite a generous reward. I think I understand a little why the heavenly demon competition is said to be so lucrative. However, the problem was not the points. The 12th Ma Wang has been born. The rank of Ma Wang, Kim Yuan, is second. The alias is blank. Along with Yuan, it was a message that commonly appeared in the minds of the demons. 12th Ma Wang, a newly acquired title. The name itself was ominous. Ma Wang. As far as Yuan knew, it was a title given only to the high rankers of the Great Demon Guild, Ma Wang, in the demon realm. Swoosh. Diablo's gaze, who had been momentarily angry at the fact that he was being used by someone, turned to Yuan. Was it you? He was the head of the Ma Wang Guild. And at the same time, he was also the absolute king who ruled the demon realm. There was no way he wouldn't know about the birth of a new Ma Wang. Probably. If it's the 12th, then it's next to Lucifer. There were only 11 Ma Wangs in existence up until now. Yuan's position was 12th. If you just looked at the numbers, it was quite far behind, but the ranking was completely different. Second from the front, Yuan's current rank within Ma Wang was officially next to Diablo. Yuan had just recently rejected the Ma Wang Guild's offer to join. And that rejection included taking the position of Ma Wang. But now he had acquired the title and the name of a Ma Wang. The world is full of surprises. 12th Ma Wang, hash category, title. Hash rank, A+. Hash a title given to those who have officially become Ma Wang in the guild, Ma Wang. The power of the title increases as the rank in the demon realm rises. Hash gives the authority to command relatively lower-ranking demons. However, the authority that can be used on demons with the same Ma Wang title can only be used once every 10 years. Hash if the authority is disobeyed, the title is revoked. Hash magic power +10. The effects of the title were quite excellent. It didn't have any special powers like King of the Dead. The 12th Ma Wang was closer to a title like Archbishop of the Heavenly Demon Religion, if you had to categorize it. The power to lead a guild. Depending on your perspective, it could be a title with more valuable power than a title like King of the Dead. Depending on one's perspective, it could be a title with more value than the title of the King of the Dead. Diablo's words were a clear provocation. He was saying that there was a small chance of winning, so he should give it a try. The Great Lord's title is higher in rank than the High Priest of the Heavenly Demon Religion. It's probably because of the difference in the size of the guilds. The Great Lord is a huge guild. Unlike the Muram of the martial arts world, which had just recently taken a step into becoming a large guild, this was a force that had been called a large guild for a long time. Of course, it was difficult to compare it to the Heavenly Demon Religion or the Muram. The ranking is already high enough. Yuan's current ranking was second. Except for Diablo, there was no one who could give orders to Yuan. It was an attractive enough effect. But despite that, there was still a sense of regret. Yuan looked at Diablo. Diablo noticed the meaning in his gaze and smiled as if he found it amusing. The High Priest of the Heavenly Demon Religion and this 12th Great Lord were all the same. Yuan was the second in command of each guild. In order to move a guild, he had to have the permission of the one above him. I welcome a challenge anytime. Although it was just words, for a moment, Yuan felt as if Diablo was going to throw a punch at him at any moment. Diablo's eyes flickered red. Yuan raised both hands. All right, I'm not going to waste my time trying to break a rock with an egg. Aren't you more than an egg? Thud. Diablo stood up and took a step toward Yuan. He was a head taller than Yuan. Because of the strength he felt from his physique, Yuan felt as if he was a giant. You never know. If we fight 100 times, I might win once. It was a provocation to start a fight. It would be a lie if he said he wasn't tempted. If Yuan were to win this fight, he would gain a lot. Above all, because of the Heavenly Demon competition, the Great Lord had absorbed the sky. The integration of two large guilds. Even if Metatron and Baal, the core forces of each camp, were gone, its size was enormous. Furthermore, Yuan, who had obtained the title of Great Lord, was now likely to officially become the head of the Great Lord. If he were to defeat Diablo here, Yuan would become the king ruling over two large guilds. But that's why Yuan wasn't reckless enough to pick a meaningless fight because he was tempted by something big. Once out of 100 times. The probability is too low. No, perhaps not even once out of 100 times. Diablo's words were a clear provocation. He was saying to take a chance, since there was a small chance of winning. It wasn't wrong. 1 in 100, no, 1 in 10,000. There was a chance that Wu 1 could win. However, there was a big gap between Wu 1 and Diablo, so much so that the probability was that low. Above all, I haven't even seen this guy's main body yet. The Diablo in front of him was not his main body. Wu 1 recalled the test on the 41st floor where he had first encountered Diablo. It was only a clone, but at that time, Diablo did not look like a human as he did now. Behemoth, who revealed his main body, was a demon in the form of a giant ox. Then what about Diablo? He couldn't imagine what he would look like when he revealed his original form, or how much power he would show right now. I'll challenge you when I think I can win. Not yet. For now, he had to be satisfied with this much. He had already gained more than he had initially expected. This was all he could get from the Qianma competition. Are you saying you won't fight a fight you can't win? Yes, that's what I expected. Creak. The corners of Diablo's mouth went up. He said with a face that looked like he was expecting and enjoying it. Next time you challenge me, you'll be sure you can beat me. He had always been waiting for a demon who could defeat him. A stronger enemy, a stronger demon. He believed that the demonic world could only develop further if a demon who surpassed him was born someday. Even though he was only half, Wu Wan was a demon who could handle magic as well as being human. Furthermore, by gaining the title of Ma Wang, he had taken another step, albeit a small one, towards becoming the Ma Wang. If it was Wu Wan? No, definitely. With such anticipation, Diablo reached out his hand and asked for a handshake. Anyway, congratulations on becoming the Ma Wang. It's not like you've officially joined the guild. Wu Wan took Diablo's hand. Thank you. With the handshake, Wu Wan left Diablo's barracks. There were several demons gathered in the garrison. As Wu Wan left the barracks, the demons who had been gathered around scattered in surprise. They were demons who had gathered for the birth of the new Ma Wang. Really, that guy is the 12th? Is he really the 12th? To the naked eye, it might have looked like a small firefly, but it was actually an errand boy for the management office. Does that mean he's the successor to Bal Nim? A human? Not a human anymore. He's a devil now. How did he change his origin? Hey, what can't be done in this tower? Even so, he could hear the demons gossiping about him as the topic of their conversation. Their annoying gazes were getting on his nerves. He had no intention of remaining the subject of their ridicule and staying put on the chopping block. In any case, it was a title he would be using from now on. Yuan decided to start using it right away. Disperse. The moment they heard Yuan's voice. Using the authority of the 12th Demon King. The power of the title manifested, and the demons who had been glaring at Yuan quickly began to scatter far away from him. The area around Diablo's barracks became empty. After driving away the demons with a single word, Yuan looked at the barracks where Diablo was for a moment before starting to walk again. With this, time is on our side. Angels and demons. The two races would no longer waste their energy on a useless battle called the Heavenly Demon War. The integration of the two large guilds would have a rather positive effect on increasing their power. He had gained quite a bit from this battle. Even more so than the mere rewards, the biggest gain was being able to increase the power of the two races. However, on the other hand, there was also a sense of unease. It was too easy. It was clear that the foolish chaos had begun to be aware of Yuan. Despite that, the bastard had not made any moves during this battle. He had thought that the bastard would at least take a breather after what happened last time, but he hadn't expected things to go so smoothly. Even if he couldn't use his powers, if the foolish chaos had intervened, Metatron wouldn't have been defeated so easily. Metatron, the Heavenly King. That bastard was one of the puppets created by the foolish chaos long ago. What was that bastard doing? Right now, Yuan thought of the bastard who must be stockpiling his power somewhere. He had a bad feeling about this. The spot where Yuan had left. Diablo sat there quietly and tapped his fingers on his desk. Tap, tap, the rhythmic sound echoed throughout the silent barracks. In the middle of this, Diablo raised his head. Management office. You noticed. Swish. A small light floated up above the ceiling of the barracks. A small glimmer of light appeared above the ceiling of the barracks. Kim Yuan, are you planning on pushing him? Although it looked like a small firefly from the outside, it was actually the errand boy of the administrator. An errand boy of a considerably high rank at that. The errand boy of the peak of the administrator's office, the ranking administrator's office. You think I wouldn't know if you approached me like an errand boy? The ranking administrator's office is supposed to be secretive. Please keep today's meeting a secret, Diablo Nim. Sneaky bastards. The ranking administrator's office was everywhere. They saw and heard everything in this tower and measured the rankings with their own standards. Although the details of their standards were unknown, none of the rankers had any doubts about the rankings created by the administrator's office. Because of Kim Yuan. As expected, you know. Then isn't there anything more to hear? Yuan's actions were already quite well known among the rankers belonging to the Demon King, including the Demon King himself. There was no way the ranking administrator's office, which could find out countless pieces of information that no one knew about, would not know such common information. Diablo couldn't figure out why the errand boy of the administrator's office had come to him. However, isn't there one more important thing? Important thing? The will of Diablo Nim. If what they needed was not anyone else's thoughts but Diablo's, then the story would be different. That was information that only one person in the tower, Diablo himself, could know. Depending on your will, the title Kim Yuan earned and his position could all become nothing. But on the other hand, you could also put the great power of the Demon King who has united with the heavens under your feet. The power of the Demon King changed depending on Diablo's will. Just like the title Yuan had earned. If Diablo gave Yuan the order to die, Yuan would have no choice but to give up his title immediately. That was how great the authority of Diablo, the leader of the Demon Kings, was. On the other hand, what if Diablo pushed Yuan? Yuan would immediately become the second in command of a huge guild and a high ranker with absolute command. Yuan, who had been acting like a lone wolf until now. His ranking will change according to your will. That's why I'm asking. The errand boy came down from the ceiling of the barracks and approached Diablo. A glimmer of light came close to his nose. Only then did the errand boy ask Diablo the reason he had come. Kim Yuan, do you intend to push through? Chapter 332. Early morning. Crunch. Yuan took a bite of a fruit. It was still light outside. Unlike the demon realm, night in the sky passed by in the blink of an eye. After getting a good night's rest, his body and mind felt refreshed. It seemed like it had been a while since he had eaten a leisurely meal. It was thanks to the hospitality of the Demon King's army. Yuan had stayed in the city of the sky for a few days to rest. I should probably start moving today. He had rushed over for this Qianma tournament. He had taken the test without rest to meet the schedule, and in the end, he had successfully resolved the Qianma tournament. Eat, sleep, eat again, sleep again. After spending a few days like that, his heavy head felt a little lighter. As he was finishing his leisurely last meal. Buzz, buzz. The player kit he had placed on the table rang. Hearken. Yuan hesitated for a moment at the name that appeared on the kit. If he answered this call now, the leisure he had finally gained would be ruined. The ringing continued without end. Yuan eventually answered the call. Hey, what the hell is going on? He thought it was a good thing he had put the kit far away from his ear. As expected, Harkin raised his voice from the beginning. What's the matter? Your rank, man, haven't you checked yet? Rank. Yuan reached for his player kit. Hang up. Click. Yuan hung up the call in a hurry and began searching for information with his player kit. This was the second time Harkin had made such a fuss. The first time was when Yuan's rank was first registered in the rankings. It was quite surprising that Yuan, who wasn't even a ranker, was registered in the rankings. However, even after Yuan's rank went up, Harkin didn't contact him separately. It was as if he wasn't surprised anymore. But this time, it wasn't that. What the hell happened to my rank? Yuan searched for his rank and froze in place for a moment. It was because his rank had risen so high that he couldn't believe it. Kim Yuan, 53rd. 53rd place. It was a rank that was only 2 ranks lower than Hades, the current king of Olympus. No matter how much Yuan's strength had increased, it was too much of a rank increase. Yuan's previous rank was 67th place. It had risen by a whopping 14 ranks. Even when he had finished Ragnarok, Yuan's rank hadn't skyrocketed like this. Is it because of the title? Having an affiliation somewhere meant more than just one's own strength becoming stronger. Ragel was like that right now. He was a heavenly minister with mediocre high-ranker strength, but he was ranked within the top 100. It was because his authority alone made him the second most powerful person in the sky. If it had been any other ranker, they would have danced at their increased rank, but Yuan felt dizzy instead. Related articles appeared next to Yuan's rank. Kim Yuan's rank increase, administrative error. The truth of the rankings, strength. The Demon King's second in command. Is Kim Yuan's backer the Demon Realm? Analysis of Kim Yuan's actions. His tutorial motivation. Even just skimming the titles, he could tell what they were about. Some of the articles had provocative titles, as if they were convinced that Yuan had joined the Demon King. Those damn reporters. Yuan had no interest in the affairs of the world. Of course, Yuan already knew not only how the world worked but also how it would work. He knew far more than the reporters who were running around and couldn't help but be uninterested in their information. But maybe it was because he was bored. Meanwhile, perhaps because he was bored out of his mind. The fight that had continued for as long as Olympus history was the Qianma Grand Competition. Perhaps it was a fight with even greater meaning than the Gigantomachi. Starting with the speculative articles about himself, Yuan began reading several major articles. Then, one article caught Yuan's eye. Power struggle within Olympus. Conflict between Hera and Hades. Hercules at a crossroads. Also, the Apollo and Artemis siblings. Olympus high ranker Dionysus, no Olympus power struggle. Olympus has already stabilized the truth. Olympus after Zeus stepped down. The one who inherited the vacant king's seat was Hades. He was the highest-ranking ranker in Olympus, excluding Zeus, and everyone considered him a suitable successor to Zeus. Because Poseidon was also not in Olympus when Zeus was purged. However, aside from the three gods, there was another high ranker in Olympus who could threaten him. Hera, Zeus' wife and a high ranker with the next highest rank after the three gods. She was said to be moving to take over Olympus. Did this originally happen? He searched his memories but found nothing. The history he knew had changed. It smelled fishy. If you change the events one by one, there will definitely be some kind of change. Then I guess we should dig into that part. The fact that there's a change means that there's a high possibility that there was some kind of intervention. He wasn't sure yet, but it seemed like it needed to be checked. Then, Yu-1 turned the screen and called Hargan again. A brief ringing sound, and very shortly after, "Why are you hanging up the phone like this?" Hargan's very angry voice returned. "Sorry, I said I'd call you as soon as I checked." "Rank? Yeah, sure, you must be curious. It went up a lot, really." Fortunately, Hargan wasn't too upset. It wasn't the first or second time Yu-1 had hung up on him like this, and he had other intentions as well. "I guess you don't check the rankings either, so you don't know about our news." Hargan spoke first. It was a welcome start for Yu-1, who was about to bring up the subject of Olympus. "I guess you're in the middle of a fight. It's not at the level of a fight. Right now." A voice that cut off for a moment. The conflict felt very close. It felt like he could hear the sound of heads rolling, so Yu-1 slowly waited for Hargan's next words. No, for now, can we meet and talk? We'll come to you." It seemed like he had something to ask for help with. It probably wouldn't take long. Olympus had the best means of transportation, the sun chariot. Where am I right now? It took Hargan only 4 hours to find Yu-1. He had called in the morning after breakfast and arrived around lunchtime. Yu-1 was sitting in a cafe outside his dorm. There were few customers in the nearly empty cafe, and there was nothing in particular to be conscious of. "You came early. It was only 2 floors down. Sit down, for now." Creak. Hargan sat down across from Yu-1. He sat in the empty cafe and looked out the window, his eyes wide with wonder. "It's awkward. There are demons walking around here. Everyone should get used to it now. We're in the same guild. Are you really okay with it?" "Of course, for now, it seems like everything is okay because of Diablo's orders. No one knows when or what problems will arise. It's dangerous. It was a problem that we had to face someday. Ever since the Cheonma Grand competition began, it was set in stone. Things really are happening. Originally, it was something that should have come as a great surprise. As long as Olympus history has existed, so too has the Centaur War. It might even be a more significant battle than the Gigantomachy. But now, Wu Yun had put an end to the Centaur War. It was absurd, but it felt like it was about to happen now. It's not the first time something like this has happened. He had reorganized Olympus and overthrown the Triumvirate. He had caused Ragnarok and destroyed Muspelheim, and now he had ended the Centaur War. Now, it seemed like he wouldn't be surprised by anything that happened. When Hargan arrived, the drinks that Wu Yun had ordered in advance came out. Hargan's was a sweet drink rather than coffee. "Anyway, congratulations. Your ranking went up, and you've finally settled into one place." "I haven't settled down." It's a false report." The reporters said something strange. "A false report?" Hargan tilted his head and scratched his head, wondering what he was talking about. The article clearly stated that he had become the second in command of the Demon King. It was hard to understand Wu Yun's drastic rise in the rankings without it. But Wu Yun himself said it wasn't. "Well, you must be right. You're not the kind of guy who would lie about something like this." Hargan straightened his posture. Hargan, who was hunching forward, changed the subject of the conversation, saying, "Anyway, I think I've heard the news going around these days. Do you know what's going on in Olympus these days?" Dionysus gave an interview saying that everything was fine. "You don't believe that, do you?" "Of course not." Hargan nodded as if relieved. "That's right. Something big has happened." His face suddenly became serious. Wu Yun knew that Olympus was in chaos, but it was the first time he had seen Hargan react so seriously. "Is it really because of Hera?" "Yes." Hargan shook his head and covered his head with one hand as if his head was throbbing when he thought about recent events. "I don't know if she's on the back of Great Uncle Poseidon or if she's absorbed many other rankers within Olympus, but lately, it seems like Hera is trying to keep Great Uncle Hades in check. Maybe an outside force intervened in the guild. That would be the worst. It could turn into a war, not a problem within the guild." "What about Hercules? What is he doing?" In some ways, it was the simplest problem. Hercules, the giant slayer. He was the strongest force in Olympus in Zeus' absence, and he was a high ranker with the power of heaven beyond the sky. Moreover, after obtaining a club made from the branches of Yggdrasil in Ragnarok, he possessed enough power to single-handedly oppose Olympus. If brother Hercules helps us, we have nothing to worry about. No, Hera wouldn't have been able to do this in the first place because of him. Hargan sighed deeply. That's the problem, that was why Hargan had come to Wu Yun. For some reason, I can't contact brother Hercules. Contact him. With his skills, nothing would have happened to him. His ranking is still the same. It was true, Wu Yun wasn't too worried about Hercules. Unless Hera joined hands with Zeus again, there would be no means to threaten Hercules. However, Zeus was currently on the 100th floor. He didn't have the time to join hands with Hera. Then what are you so worried about? The problem is, from what we've gathered, it seems like Hera has proposed a bet. A bet? Along with those words, Hargan whispered softly to Wu Yun. 12 tasks. It seems like he accepted it. Chapter 333. The 12 Labors. It was a story passed down like a legend in Olympus. It was said that those who completed all 12 labors would become a hero of Olympus. I had heard the name a few times. Of course, I had heard the story from Hercules. The 12 labors. I almost died back then. Hercules lifted a wine bottle the size of his torso with one hand and gulped it down. Half of the wine spilled as he drank. He was quite drunk. Yuan told him to stop drinking, but the drinking party, with memories as its side dish, was not going to end easily. The hellhound Cerberus, the Hydra, the golden apples, some were difficult, and some were easy. He became talkative. Hercules was not someone who got drunk easily, but once he did, it was difficult to stop him. It was a past that had already passed. However, at times like this, all I could do was listen. The most difficult one among them was, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his throbbing head. I had thought that it would happen someday. However, this was too soon. The reason the schedule was moved up like this is probably, there was only one variable. Is it because of me? Destroying Olympus, the purge of Zeus and the changed power structure, and the problems that would arise because of it. No matter how smart and knowledgeable the rankers who gathered were, there was no way to know when or in which direction the broken tower would collapse. In the end, they had no choice but to move according to the situation. I had not expected the 12 labors to start this quickly. It's a test I've passed once. However, Hercules had a higher ranking than I did back then. He had also started the 12 labors not because Hera had ordered him to, but because he had wanted to. It might be a little dangerous. Are you done thinking? It seemed like the silence had been a little long. At Halgan's question, Yuan straightened his posture and nodded. Yeah, more or less. Anyway, that's why I'd like you to help me. Why me? There were many powerful people in Olympus. Hades could have moved directly, or there were Poseidon and the Apollo siblings. But why would he come all the way here to ask me this favor? Wu Yun wanted a solid reason. You're close with Heracles Nim, and you have the skills. After hesitating for a moment, Hargan scratched his head. More than anything, if I ask you, there's nothing you can't do. It sounded like something that had to be certain. Certainly, in terms of ranking alone, Wu Yun was now in a similar position to Hades. It was a much better situation for an outsider like Wu Yun to move rather than Hades, the head of the guild. Don't worry too much, we'll pay you enough. We're not the kind of punks who just make one request and then leave. How much? 5 million points. 5 million inches. It was a huge sum. It meant that Olympus valued Wu Yun and Heracles that much. Of course, it also meant that it was a dangerous task. If I earn that many points, there are quite a few things I can do right away. Points had various uses: purchasing valuable items, expanding forces, mercenaries, negotiations using points. With 5 million points, there was a lot you could do. That's why people in the tower said that if you have enough points, you can even become a god. So Wu Yun was a little hesitant. However, forget the points, I'll take something else. Is there anything else you want? Athena's Aegis. Aegis. Hargan's face contorted. It was a difficult request. That's something my sister Athena has. If you don't give it to me, Hera's salvation won't matter. You bastard, that's. Hargan gritted his teeth as his neck turned red. Athena's Aegis, and Hera's salvation, both were items that symbolized Olympus. Even with points, it would be like trying to reach for the stars, and they were the pride of Olympus in and of themselves. And yet he was asking for such items as compensation. Compared to 5 million points, isn't it cheap? Both Aegis and Hera's salvation. How can you convert those into points? Aegis aside, Hera's salvation might not matter anymore. Hargan's expression turned serious, saying that it didn't matter anymore meant that Hera's salvation was no longer Olympus. And that meant, I won't let it be like that. The civil war in Olympus. Or, it could mean a fierce fight with outsiders. Perhaps Hera is preparing for a rebellion, just as she feared. I'll try to bring back the rankers and players who have gone over to the other side. If they become weaker, they might give up first. Somehow, I don't think it'll be that easy. Don't say that. If you say that, I feel like it'll really happen. Is that so? Yuan finished the rest of his coffee in one gulp. In any case, he had finished talking about what he needed to say to Hargan. Now it was time to rest. Anyway, let me know as soon as you decide. Whether it's Aegis or Hera's salvation. The request. Are you taking it? Maybe. Gulp. Yuan stood up from his seat. If you want to hear a definitive answer, you need to speak definitively as well. Hey, why are you like this? Didn't you say you weren't a beggar who would beg after only seeing one thing? Then I'm going. Yuan left his seat first. From afar, he could hear Hargan clutching his head. It seemed like he had quite a headache. Probably from now on, he would be running around trying to find Aegis or Hera's salvation, just as Yuan had said. The 12 labors. There were a total of 12 tasks given by Hera. Unable to remember all of the details, Yuan walked slowly for a while, trying to recall his memories. Where did I spend the most time? Just in case, during his conversation with Hargan, when Hargan had mentioned that he couldn't contact Heracles, he had left a message through the key. However, as expected, Heracles wasn't receiving any messages through the key. This meant that he had no choice but to move on his own 2 feet. To think that something he had thought of as just drinking would come back to haunt him like this. Yuan recalled the events of that day in his head. The most difficult one. Fortunately, even though it was just drinking, Yuan had asked Heracles what the most difficult trial was, in order to match his good mood. It was finding the Saranian hind. You must have been really strong, since you didn't even hesitate. No, it was fast, but I wasn't strong. Then, it took a long time to catch. Just thinking about it seemed to give him a headache, as Heracles shook his head and sighed deeply. Recalling the events of that day only gave him a headache, so Heracles sighed deeply, shaking his head. No time to rest. The Saranian hind, Carania. A monster from legends with golden antlers and hooves of bronze. Saying that, the Caranian hind wasn't really a monster, but rather something closer to a divine beast. It was something that even Artemis, who had hunted several of them, said was not an easy hunt. That slow thing, no way I'd have trouble catching it. Heracles was a monster of strength. As befitting a high-ranking high ranker, his speed was also quite fast, but his stats were very one-sided. On the other hand, Artemis was the high ranker considered to be the best in terms of agility on Olympus. Even for Artemis, the Caranian hind was difficult to hunt. That was probably the 3rd task, wasn't it? If the tasks had started a few days earlier, then he would probably be hunting the Hydra right now. It wouldn't be bad to go and wait for it in advance. Having decided on his destination, Yuan quickened his pace. With bandages wrapped around his shoulder, Heracles staggered. The poison was stronger than he had thought. Because of the last head, The Hydra, a monster with 9 heads and venom. This creature, often compared to the Yamata no Orochi, still existed, never having been slain by anyone. Unlike the Yamata no Orochi, it hadn't caused any major damage to cities, so no rankers or guilds had ever tried to subjugate it. That was why its true strength hadn't been fully revealed yet. Phew, fortunately, Heracles had managed to deal with the Hydra by himself. The creature's body, buried in a giant mountain, would probably never see the light of day again. Rip, he quickly tore off the bandages he had wrapped around himself. Blood flowed out a little, but the wound was already mostly healed. To be precise, he hadn't really been wounded. Just a single teeth mark. That was the extent of the injuries Heracles had sustained in this battle. But that one wound was the problem. Was my poison resistance too low? Poison, that was the most fearsome thing about the Hydra. Fortunately, the poison didn't last very long. Was it because it only had a physical body? Heracles' brute strength was able to endure the Hydra's poison without any real antidote. Without a moment to spare. The staggering was only momentary. Heracles headed straight to the 37th floor. A world where only mountains and fields existed. Arriving in a place inhabited only by elves and spirits of the spirit world, Heracles flopped down on the spot with sweat dripping down his forehead. Phew, The more he moved, the faster the poison spread. He needed a break. Sitting down for a moment, a vast plain came into Heracles' eyes. Saranian, a deer he had never actually seen. It must not be an ordinary creature, considering that it was called a divine beast and not a monster. Even Artemis hadn't been able to catch more than a few. Where do I find this thing? He would rather fight the Hydra again. He absolutely hated this kind of trial. Heracles lay down in the middle of the vast field, drawing a large letter, T, with his body. He planned to rest his body for a while and think. But then, you came early. Swish, a shadow fell over Heracles' body. Heracles slowly opened his eyes, identified the shadow, and shot up. Why are you here? You came much earlier than I thought. The owner of the shadow was Yuan, who had been waiting for Heracles to come. He thought it wouldn't take that long, but he didn't expect it to be this fast. That meant he had already defeated the Nemean lion and the Hydra. Heracles guarded against Yuan and asked, "Who sent you?" "From Olympus, of course." An uncomfortable atmosphere flowed for a moment. Heracles hesitated for a moment before getting up and saying, "Go back. I know what you're here for, but I have no intention of listening." As if he had expected that, Yuan didn't seem that flustered. If he had planned to do something with Olympus, he would have contacted him in the first place. However, "But you'll need this, won't you?" Swish. Yuan reached into his inventory. "What the?" Heracles' gaze naturally turned to Yuan's hand, which had been taken out. Eventually, Heracles found the golden horn in Yuan's hand. Don't tell me, the Saranian. Chapter 334. Long and sharp horns, a surface so sharp and smooth, as if it had been crafted. A light that gleamed in gold, and within it, a strange and mysterious energy. What does it look like? At Yuan's question, Heracles nodded confidently. I guess that's right, it was exactly as he had heard. The horn of Sarania had a mysterious power, and it was said that if you drank from it, you would become immortal. There was no way Yuan could have created such a thing, and Yuan was not the type to cheat with something like this. In that case, swish, Yuan threw the horn of Sarania and caught it lightly in his hand again. Were you holding it in preparation? Heracles' gaze was fixed on the horn of Sarania. No matter how he had caught it, Yuan had caught the horn of Sarania. Ownership belonged to Yuan, and with this, his task was as good as over. If you take this, you won't have much trouble with the task. Will you negotiate? Yes. How much do you want? It wasn't Heracles' usual gaze. Whatever bet he had made with Hera, he was full of venom. It felt a little dangerous. There was only one time when Heracles had such a look in his eyes. When he had a conviction. It was the look he had when he believed he was doing the right thing, that it was justice. In most cases like this, he was not wrong, but stubbornness has always been that guy's biggest flaw. Creak. Yuan gripped the horn of Sarania tightly in his hand. Heracles was dangerous in this state. If the negotiation didn't go well, he might try to take the horn by force. Was it because he had read Yuan's vigilance? Heracles rose to his feet. I know you didn't do this for points. At Yuan's words, Heracles asked. Then, come with me from now on. Come with you. I heard you're doing the 12 tasks. You want to come with me here? Heracles' brow twitched. An unpleasant feeling was evident on his face. Heracles was the type who didn't show his displeasure easily. There's no point in doing this alone. You don't want to become a hero, do you? Rubbing his chin as if he doubted him, Yuan looked into Heracles' eyes. What kind of bet did you make? Flash. One of his eyes shone red, the other gold. There was no better way to find out his intentions. Heracles also realized that Yuan was trying to figure out his intentions. The fire and gold eyes. The eyes that see through lies. It would have been useless to try to avoid those eyes and make excuses. Heracles sighed and poured out what was in his mind. Hera thinks that she should have father's authority. The throne, yes, she says that the throne should belong to her, not to Uncle Hades or Uncle Poseidon. It wasn't entirely wrong. Hades had succeeded Zeus' throne because he was the main character of Olympus' downfall. A new king who drove out the tyrant Zeus. His rank was also the highest in Olympus, excluding Zeus, so he had no shortcomings. But that might not have been the case for Hera. In reality, Hera's influence in Olympus is greater than her uncle's. She naturally absorbed the forces that followed father. So that's why this problem arose. Yes, the scales have been balanced. Hades had a high rank, but he was the lord of hell. Hades, who didn't have much power, couldn't have a very solid position. On the other hand, even though Hera had a relatively low rank, she had countless rankers and forces. It was a situation where she could challenge him. Furthermore, she had enough justification for the throne. It's hard to tell who's right and who's wrong. It's natural for her to want to take back her father's throne. What about Hades? His position is that he can't repeat history. If Hera takes back her power, there might be another fight with the giants. Hades had been trying to stop the long-standing fight with the giants and seek reconciliation. On the other hand, Hera's position was that Hades was ruining what Zeus had accomplished. The important thing was Heracles. Hades and Hera, depending on which side he takes, the outcome of this fight will be different. Which side are you on? I want to avoid fighting the giants if possible. Then you've decided which side you're on. However, the moment those words came out, Yuan seemed to know what was coming. I want to avoid shedding any more blood. He was extremely idealistic and pacifistic. He wanted to end the conflict without fighting. That desire was what brought Heracles to this place. That's why I went to her. To tell her to stop fighting. And that's when she proposed this bet. Yes, Heracles nodded. She said that if I succeeded in all 12 tasks, she would give up everything and back down. I knew it. Even though he had only met her once, Yuan remembered his impression of Hera. Hera's impression was vivid enough to be remembered even after seeing her only once. She's still the same. Ambition, desire, and venom. Those were the words that could describe Hera. She didn't care about the means and methods as long as it was for her goal. In order to overcome the great wall called Heracles, she chose the method of the 12 tasks. Through this bet, Heracles had decided to shoulder the conflict within Olympus alone. He would never back down easily if it meant stopping a fight where blood would flow like a river. Do you think Hera will keep that promise? She will. Otherwise, I will snap her neck. A confident voice. Of course, even Hera wouldn't have the guts to break her promise with Heracles. If she did, she would turn the giants, who had somehow managed to remain neutral, into enemies. Now that you know, let it go. There is no place for an outsider like you to interfere in this bet. I know, but, in Yuan's eyes, Heracles already seemed like he had fallen into a trap. But Heracles' stubbornness was already too deeply ingrained to explain it to him. I still can't trust her. You're not making sense. Do you have to be so stubborn? I'm not saying I'm going to interfere with your tasks. I will overcome the tasks with my own strength alone. That is the whole point of this bet. As expected, this wouldn't be solved with words like this. Yuan glanced at the wound on Heracles' shoulder. The wound from the Hydra. Yuan looked at the wound for a moment before opening his mouth. The third task will probably be the most difficult for you. It would be better to fight. You're the type of person who's used to hunting, not this kind of thing. I'm not someone who can't even catch a deer, you know. Not just any deer, but the Saranian hind. Even Artemis had a hard time catching it. Heracles' face became more and more distorted. So, one of two things. Swish. Yuan put the horn in his inventory as if he was going to reach out at any moment. Come with me, or stop here. Heracles' eyebrows twitched again at those words. I won't refuse such an offer. No one could stop Heracles' stubbornness. If he was stubborn, he was on par with Son Goku. However, Yuan knew the only way to break that stubbornness. Then let's make a bet while we're at it. A bet? You and I will fight. Heracles made a curious expression. That's a bet that's too much in my favor. No matter how high Yuan's rank had become, the gap between Heracles and Yuan wasn't small. And of course, Yuan knew that. Yeah, I know. You're suggesting such a bet even though you know that. 30 minutes. 30 minutes. If I fall within 30 minutes, it's your victory. If the fight isn't over within that time, it's my victory. Yuan shrugged and spoke shamelessly after saying that. In the first place, it's impossible for me to defeat you, you know. He might be able to do it if he could throw near, but it wasn't possible to do that in front of Heracles. This fight wasn't one that he had to win. 30 minutes. It was a fight where he had to endure Heracles' fists for that amount of time. 30 minutes. Heracles fell into contemplation for a moment. 30 minutes was by no means a short amount of time. Normally, it would pass by so quickly that he wouldn't even notice, but in a fight where lives were at stake, time tended to flow at a different pace. Especially since there was a considerable gap in their abilities. All right, bam, Heracles clenched his fist. Don't regret it. That was the moment the bet was made. Thud, thud. The two walked in different directions. When the distance was far enough apart, Hercules spoke. You always help me. Click. Without anyone saying it first, the two turned their bodies at the same time. You made it so easy to solve the task that I thought would be the most difficult. It's a bit too early to say it's solved. Well. Thud. Another step. Hercules. Footsteps toward Eugene echoed on the ground. How much force was transmitted through the soles of his feet into the ground? It felt like the body facing him was being crushed. I don't think so. Knock, knock, knock. Sweat dripped from Eugene's forehead, overwhelmed by Hercules' atmosphere. An overwhelming aura emanated from the huge body that was well over 2 meters tall. Gulp. Dry saliva passed through his throat with difficulty. Maybe it will be the hardest fight. It was a pretty impromptu bet. It was absurd. He had to hold out for 30 minutes against Hercules, who was holding the staff of Yggdrasil. But he couldn't help it. From Hercules' point of view, if it wasn't a bet that he was 100% sure of winning, he wouldn't have accepted the bet in the first place. In fact, even though he was confident in his victory, he showed signs of hesitation for a moment. Yes, even if it was difficult, in the end, this was the only way. To break that stubbornness, Eugene took out his player kit and checked the time. It's 11:28 now. Click. 31 seconds. I'll start when it's 30 minutes. Yes, let's do that. 1 minute 30 seconds. It was a short time to catch his breath and draw a picture of the fight. Eugene closed his eyes. How to solve this fight? With a clock in his head, he drew a black and white picture. Time passed like that. Squeak. Eugene, who opened his eyes again, drew his sword. It was time. Wan Jiamjung reads the path. Sensory zone is activated. Whoosh, swoosh. Eugene's pupils glowed in different colors, and all the movements around him became clear. It wasn't a fight to save magic power. This fight was probably. Let's start. It will not be enough even if I use all my power. Chapter 335. Boom. Heracles' body flew up. He had not raised his club. Fortunately, because Heracles wielding the Yggdrasil's club would be impossible to deal with. Whoosh. Crack. Heracles' fist struck the ground. The ground caved in, centered around the point where his fist had hit. The bedrock on the edge rose up, blocking Yuan's movements. Yuan clicked his tongue once more at the sight. His brute strength is the same as ever. That was pure physical strength without any skills or items. It was amazing. As expected, he was worthy of being the strongest in the tower in terms of pure strength. Are you trying to buy time by running away? Thud. Heracles, who had stretched his leg forward again, discovered Yuan, who had moved away from his spot. Well, you have no choice. Heracles did not call Yuan a coward. Rather, it was a cowardly situation to call him a coward. Heracles knew his own strength well and had already anticipated that Yuan would not engage in a head-on confrontation. Time was Yuan's weapon, after all. Not using his strongest weapon was not Yuan's style of fighting. But you see, whoosh, Heracles' fist struck empty air. This fight was 10 years too early. Quote exclamation mark quote. Bam. Whoosh. A strong wind engulfed Yuan's body. The blow that struck the air with his fist became wind pressure and struck Yuan's body. Yuan was blown away by the wind. Along with the wind pressure, dust rose up. Whoosh. Walking through the dust, Heracles approached Yuan again. Boom. The beautiful field was turned into a wasteland with just 2 punches. The ground rose up everywhere. Heracles' fist came down on Yuan. Crunch. Instead of grabbing his neck, Heracles' hand grabbed a pitiful piece of rock. Yuan's movements were smooth. His movements were as if he knew what Heracles was going to do from the start. Like a loach, Golden Crow's eyesight and sensory field. They were abilities that showed the best evasion capabilities in close combat. Yuan moved smoothly, as if not allowing Heracles to close the distance. I believed in this. Was this it? However, whiff. If he had simply relied on his strength and fought recklessly, he would not have earned the title, Giant Slayer, or his current rank. The distance between Heracles and Yuan rapidly decreased. Whoosh. A fist that extended in a straight line. And at that moment, boom, Yuan's gigantification activated. The strength of the giant is imbued in your arms. Boom. The ground that the two were standing on caved in from the shock of their fists colliding. Taking his fist head on, Heracles, who had not expected this development, made a surprised expression. Thud, thump. Yuan's body was blown away from the collision of the 2 fists. Yuan, who had rolled on the ground a few times, hurriedly steadied himself by grabbing the ground. Ah! Yuan grimaced slightly, holding his right shoulder. My shoulder. Fortunately, he was using gigantification. If he hadn't, his fist would have been crushed. He thought that even if he used gigantification, he would be able to clash head-on. It seemed that this was still not enough. Gigantification alone is not enough. He raised his head and saw Heracles running towards him without stopping. There was no time to think. Yuan quickly gathered his magic power. Crackle! A red giant's figure appeared behind Yuan's back. A giant's clone made of a huge mass of magic power. Qian Maryong. Its uses were nearly endless. This is the first time I'm using it in actual combat. Qian Maryong responds to gigantification. The strength of the giant is imbued in Qian Maryong. Holy fire is imbued in Qian Maryong. The heavenly demon spirit was a form made of a mass of magical power, and at the same time, it was like a clone of Wu Wan. The vessel that had contained the sacred flame that had been sealed in the heavenly mountain for a long time. That vessel was not simply made to contain the sacred flame. Ku Wook, the heavenly demon spirit, imbued with the power of gigantification, clenched its fist. The heavenly demon spirit moved exactly like Wu Wan. Soon, Bu Wang, the heavenly demon spirits and Heracles, fists collided. Kwang, quote exclamation mark quote. Along with the flames, the heavenly demon spirit, imbued with the power of a giant, did not budge even after receiving Heracles' fist head-on. Heracles was taken aback once more. He blocked it. He took a few steps back and looked up at the heavenly demon spirit. A giant figure larger than his own body. He did not know the true nature of that skill, but he could clearly see that the fist forming the figure was imbued with the power of gigantification. Heracles' eyes narrowed. It's not entirely baseless confidence, is it? Wu Wan had dodged his first fist. The second fist hit but was pushed away, and the third fist hit and was blocked. I thought 10 years was too early. Considering his growth rate, he thought that he would catch up to him within 10 years. But now that he saw it, that was not the case. It might be much faster. He had not thought that he would have improved this much by now, not long after Ragnarok had ended. Well, Wu Wan's rank had already risen to the top 50. Perhaps it was strange that he could not even do this much. Kwang, Ku Wang, Heracles, and the heavenly demon spirit's fists collided several times. The balance of power did not tip to either side. The heavenly demon spirit did not waver, and neither did Heracles suffer any wounds. How many times did their fists collide like that? Keying. For the first time, magical power stirred within Heracles' body. Kwang, Juk, JJEOK, JJEOK, JJEOK. A crack appeared on the heavenly demon spirit's fist that had been hit. Weruk. As a crack appeared on the vessel, the sacred flame contained within it naturally shook. Just like that, soon, Kwang, with the second fist, the heavenly demon spirit shattered into pieces. Kyu. Wu Wan did not linger on the shattered heavenly demon spirit. Instead, he focused on a different skill. Wan Jiamzheng reads the path. Sensory territory is activated. His field of vision expanded, and he focused more on Heracles' movements. Kwang, Juk, JJEOK, JJEOK, JJEOK. As Wu Wan dodged the fist, Heracles' fist hit the poor ground once again. The result was different from before. The ground split apart in a chain reaction as if an earthquake had occurred, and the overturned ground rose high enough to create a small mountain. The power was several times stronger. Did he use gigantification? The current Heracles, the skill that had made him the giant slayer. It was the manifestation of a skill several times more powerful than Wu Wan's gigantification. Do you really think you can win? Because you're my opponent. Heracles, who had raised his head, found Wu Wan again. Don't let your guard down. No matter what anyone said, Wu Wan was the one who had driven out Zeus and succeeded in destroying Olympus. The world thought that the main characters were Hades and Heracles, but the two of them thought differently. Both the destruction of Olympus and Ragnarok. They were all things that Wu Wan had started and ended. The guy who had made possible what was thought to be impossible. There was no reason why this time would be any different. This is a bit of an unexpected reaction. It was a difficult situation for Wu Wan, who had hoped that he would let his guard down. The skill that combined the sacred flame, gigantification, and the heavenly demon spirit had been broken. Now, there was no way to buy time with close combat. He did not like it very much, but he had no choice. For now, I have no choice but to take as little damage as possible. Wu Wan no longer tried to extend his fist or fight head-on. From now on, he had to change the way he fought a little. Pajak, golden lightning began to pour out of the ring on his right hand. A golden bolt of lightning began to shoot out from the cold ring on his right hand. The lightning quickly took shape. A small spear the size of Wu Wan's height. Wu Wan escaped from Heracles' clutches and threw the lightning he had created in his hand like a javelin. Flash, rumble, a spear of lightning pierces the body. Heracles' body faltered for a moment. Even though he was using magic power to protect his body, it was quite a stinging blow. Crackle. In the meantime, Wu Wan, who had widened the distance again, held another thunderbolt in his hand. The speed at which the spear was created was quite fast. I had seen him handle lightning before, but he was not this proficient. The power was the same. To think that a lightning bolt created so quickly could leave a slight blow on his body. It's more annoying if he keeps avoiding the fight like this. Wu Wan intended to continue to accumulate damage to his body. I wanted to grab Wu Wan by the scruff of the neck and beat him up in one breath, but well. It wasn't as easy as I thought right now. Gulp. Sweat dripped from Heracles' forehead. The more he moved, the more he felt the Hydra's venom tormenting him. I knew that time was on Wu Wan's side. But that wasn't all. Were you thinking about this too? Knowing that he was addicted to the Hydra's venom, he infiltrated the gap. If he was after all of that, it was so meticulous that it would make my jaw drop. I might get a headache if I stay here any longer. Rumble. Once again, lightning poured over Heracles' body. Heracles thought, crossing his arms to block the lightning. I need to make my arms a little longer. Swoosh. Heracles reached into his inventory. A familiar sensation in the hand. The moment he caught it, he felt strength gushing tree out ruin his whole body. Yggdrasil's Club, KWAAAK. An item created by Hephaestus, the greatest blacksmith in Olympus, at Wu Wan's request. Heracles, who did not particularly rely on items, was different from this club. The moment he held it in his hand, the strength of his whole body was amplified and his whole body was filled with strength. Like a shark that meets the sea again. Creak. Heracles took another step forward with the club in his hand. And that moment, flash, again, lightning struck from the direction Wu Wan was in. Thud, he swings the club and strikes the lightning. Lightning that disappears too easily. Wu Wan, who had been widening the distance while shooting lightning, stopped moving and looked at Heracles. Are you going to use a club? This is the only item I have. Wung. Heracles swung the club lightly in the air and began to approach Wu Wan. Understand. You mean I'm alone, but you have a lot of items. It wasn't a wrong statement. And of course Wu Wan had no intention of calling it cowardly. Well, actually, Wu Wan had much more. Actually, it's not just me. Quote. Heracles paused for a moment, as if to say what. That moment, smack, Heracles felt something creepy on the back of his neck. Sizzle. Wung. Heracles, who bowed his head hastily without realizing it, swung his club backwards. A fast-moving new type. Soon, it landed far away from Heracles. I never thought this day would come when I die. A crazy voice that said it was fun. A bright red sword with a blood-stained hand. A shield shaped like a mirror. And one red bead tied with a string to the handle of the sword. Kusanagi's sword, Yada's mirror, and Yasukani no Magatama. Susanoo, armed with the three artifact, appeared before Heracles. Chapter 336. A chilling gaze pierced Heracles' body. At the same time, dark magic power rose from Susanoo's body like smoke. The King of the Dead. Susanoo, revived by the power of that title. Heracles touched the nape of his neck with his hand. This is unusual. It had been a long time since he felt such dark energy. There were many swordsmen in Olympus, but it was certain that there was no one as skilled as that. He had been confident that once he had trained his body to a certain extent, he would never be cut by a blade like a sword. However, Susanoo standing before him was an exception. It's been a long time since I felt like I was going to be cut. The red blade in his hand. It didn't feel ordinary. Just by approaching him, he felt like he was going to be cut. Something like the smell of blood spread through the air, and in fact, the grass nearby was being cut sharply and scattered by the wind. There was only one sword with that level of anticipation in this tower. Is that the sword of Kusanagi? It was an item he had only heard of in rumors. Wu Wan had it, but Susanoo was the one who could make the best use of that item. Sword and spear, and even long-range combat. Unlike Wu Wan, who showed versatile abilities, Susanoo was so skilled with the sword that he was nicknamed the Sword Demon. Heracles' gaze turned to the mirror shield in Susanoo's other hand. If the red sword was Kusanagi, it was obvious what the other shield was. Yada's mirror. He didn't know what abilities were latent in that item. If two of the three artifacts were present, there must be another one. Heracles clicked his tongue at the bead connected to Kusanagi. This is not going to be easy. Susanoo armed with the 3 artifact. His strength had already been proven in the previous test. Susanoo's power, which blocked 10,000 players, was evaluated to be not much different from his prime. Of course, Susanoo, who did not have the power to control tens of thousands of undead legions, was only half-baked. But if he had the 3 artifact in his hands, the story would be different. Thud, Heracles pointed his club forward. Come on. Susanoo did not refuse to fight. Despite the short provocation, Susanoo burst into laughter. Good, good, swish. Susanoo slid across the ice as smoothly as if he were skating and rushed toward Heracles. The distance narrowed in an instant. The moment he judged that he had entered the range of the club, Heracles swung the club. Whung! Susanoo did not move his sword. What is he going to do? The thought was fleeting. At that moment, pop! Susanoo disappeared from his spot. Quote exclamation mark quote, screech. The vanished Susanoo appeared behind Heracles. An identical figure reflected in a mirror. Susanoo's Kusanagi emitted a red light. Thwack! Puck! Kusanagi cut into Heracles's back, and a dull sound rang out as a wound appeared on Heracles's back. Heracles staggered for a moment. When he turned around again, Susanoo was still out of sight. Pow! Pow! He wasn't just moving fast. There was no ranker in this tower who could move this fast. Yada's mirror, is it? Puck! Thud! Slash! Screech! He crossed his arms to protect his head and swung his club around once. However, the club only passed through the empty air and did not reach Susanoo. Instead, flash, crash, a sharp lightning spear flew through the air and pierced Heracles's body. It was a lightning bolt that was much more elaborate and perfect than before. Stagger. For a moment, his body could not keep up. And in that moment, Susanoo's sword pierced through. Screech. The 8 Shaku Kyokukyaksu shines. Gigantification resists the 8 Shaku Kyokukyaksu. All abilities are reduced by 5.2%. Pain tolerance is reduced by 22.5%. Physical resistance is reduced by 15.9%. Trait. Confusion is applied. Trait. Confusion resisted successfully. His body felt a little dull. It was an uncomfortable feeling, as if he were wearing clothes that didn't fit. As his body was briefly shackled. Puck! Susanoo's sword cut through Heracles's chest. Screech! Heracles's heavy body flew backward as the sword struck. Heracles lowered his head and looked at the front of his chest. It had been cut. Blood was flowing. Thud, thud, thud. As was his habit, Susanoo shook the blood off his sword onto the ground. Drops of blood fell in a straight line. I wish your body were in better shape. Susanoo noticed that something was wrong with Heracles's body. He was poisoned. Of course, his body would be dull and it would be difficult for him to exert his strength. Status effect. Poisoning, rises to stage 3. The poisoning, which had been stuck at stage 2, rose to stage 3. His life was not yet in danger. Even at this level, Heracles's resilience was enough for him to recover naturally. But that was not the case now. I'd like to wait, but... Spot. Susanoo's figure disappeared from his spot again. My master doesn't want that. When he said master, he naturally meant Yuan. They both wanted to win this bet. I feel like I'm trapped. Susanoo, who had all 3 of the divine artifacts, was strong. He was strong enough to keep up with him in close combat. The same went for Yuan's lightning bolts flying from afar. Even the lightning bolts from Yuihun that flew from afar were the same. Since facing him as he was now was still a difficult task for his current self. Hephaestus, masterpiece, created based on Zeus lightning. If he continued to get hit by the lightning borrowed from that item's power, it was clear that his body would gradually take damage. In addition to that, it just so happened that at a time like now, the Hydra's venom remained in his body. Was this situation expected? Thwack, quagwagwagwa. The swung club and Kusanagi clashed. The power of the Yasukani no Magatama surrounded Kusanagi, and Susanoo used the Yata no Kagami to leave his spot without much shock. And as expected, flash, lightning bolts flew from the same direction. Quirang, he stretched out one hand and grabbed the lightning bolt. The lightning bolt, which had been trembling for a while, shattered in Hercules' palm. Snap, Hercules squeezed his cold palm hard. The fight has turned into a long-term battle. At this rate, he wouldn't be able to end the fight quickly. Susanoo, who was rushing in again. 30 minutes. Bong, he swung the club in his hand with all his might. I'll finish it within that time somehow. Quang. The ground where Hercules stood was overturned. He could feel the mana that had filled his body rapidly burning away. It was the magical power used to maintain Susanoo. This is annoying, really. Crackle, heart of Oranos generates, lightning. It was a message he had seen countless times already. This was probably the first time he had poured out so many lightning bolts. No matter how many lightning bolts he threw, Hercules didn't budge and endured. That didn't mean he wouldn't throw lightning bolts. Susanoo was in danger. It's dangerous even if there's just a moment to spare. Susanoo had indeed shown the ability he had expected. Thanks to the fact that he had poured out a lot of magical power, he had displayed the abilities of his prime and handled the 3 artifact, including Kusanagi, at a level close to perfection. In particular, his skill in handling Kusanagi was top-notch. However, it was still insufficient to face Hercules, who wielded the club of Yggdrasil. Bong! The club was swung with all his might. Kwau! Along with the air pressure, Susanoo's body was pushed away. Even though he hadn't been hit by the club head-on, the force was still that powerful. So that's what it's like to be addicted. What would have happened if he hadn't been affected by the Hydra's venom? He would have had difficulty enduring for even 10 minutes, let alone 30. As time passed, the venom would gradually spread, but Hercules didn't weaken. No, rather, he seemed to be getting stronger. It was his mental strength. So this is Hercules, the one with an indomitable will that nothing could stop. A steel-like hero who could break down even the highest of insurmountable walls. It was because of such a Hercules that Yuehun had no choice but to fight like he was now. Because he was such a Heracles, Yu-won had no choice but to fight as he did now. Odin's figure, holding Gingnir, overlapped Yu-won and Heracles' eyes. Since facing him as usual was still a daunting task for his current self. I'm sorry, to the future him that he knew. And to Heracles, who was now before his eyes. Apologizing for being able to fight only in this situation, Yu-won threw his spear once more. I must win this time. Thud, Susanoo's body was blown away backward. The wind pressure emitted from the club. That force pushed Susanoo away. How? Susanoo's words, asking how he could not get tired with that body, couldn't be continued. It was because of Heracles' grip, which had come right up to his nose. P89 Jade restricts the target's movement. The target resists. P89 Jade. The resistance is mostly successful. Splat. Heracles' hand brushed past Susanoo's head. It was a near miss. If he hadn't slowed his movements down a bit with the P89 Jade, he wouldn't have dodged it. Thud, flap. Susanoo, who hurriedly distanced himself, swept his chest. It felt like he was facing a huge boar that was rushing in. While he was momentarily relieved at the thought that he would have been finished if he hadn't dodged it. Now you know a little trick. Heracles' confident voice was heard. I won't miss next time. It wasn't a simple provocation. Nevertheless, Susanoo couldn't stop. No, well, really. He didn't stop. What will happen? Thud, faster than ever. He ran straight at Heracles without stopping. Susanoo had always been like this. He never avoided a fight, even in situations where he could die, and he always won. This time was no different. He believed so, however. Didn't I tell you? That was only because Susanoo had never met Heracles until now. I won't miss this time. The club, which was now right before his nose. He didn't even have time to figure out what had happened. Thwack, Heracles' club instantly blew Susanoo's head off and shattered his body. The clouds in the direction the club swung with the strong wind pressure scattered like wool blown in the wind. Woo! For a moment, a strong wind blew like a typhoon. Poof, poof, poof. Susanoo's body disappeared into black smoke. Heracles, who had dealt with Susanoo, let out a long breath. For a moment, his tension eased, and he felt like his strength was leaving his body. Meanwhile, tisk, tisk, tisk. A different, ominous amount of magic power than before was felt from the direction Yu-won was standing. There's always a bigger fish. Heracles, whose stamina had dropped and his body felt as heavy as 1,000 pounds, looked back at Yu-won. Then, a black spear was seen in Yu-won's hand, emitting enormous magic power. Hercules' eyes showed Odin holding Gingnir overlapping with Yu-won. Chapter 337. The moment he swung his cudgel at Susanoo, Heracles was thinking that Yu-won's spear would come flying. That was the pattern up until now. There was no reason for it to be different. Just by putting Susanoo in front of him, he was given enough time to throw the spear during that time. But there was a reason why it was so quiet. It amplifies noticeably as time goes by. He was in a javelin throwing position, ready to throw the spear at any time, but he could tell instinctively. It was dangerous to give him time. It was the same now. That the spear was the only blow Yuan could land a fatal blow on his body. Bang! Heracles kicked the ground with all his might and flew up. In an instant, the two felt as if all the time in the world had been halved and was flowing slowly. Yuan no longer hesitated. The engine was only half started, but he had to be satisfied with this much. Zing! The magic power that had been amplifying until now amplified in an instant. Thwack! Finally, the spear shot out of Yuan's hand. Clang! 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 Heracles hurriedly planted his feet on the ground to stop his flying body and grabbed the cudgel with both hands. The tip of the spear flying towards him was reflected in his two eyes. He assumed a stance to swing the cudgel with all his might towards it. Giant strength fills your arms. The power of gigantification was infused into his two arms. His muscles quivered as if they would explode. It was different from before. That spear might have been dangerous if he didn't block it. Boom! The cudgel made from the branch of Yggdrasil was swung with all its might. And then, zong! The incoming spear and cudgel collided, causing a tumultuous ripple. Thud! 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 The spear didn't fly right away. The spear, as if it couldn't be outdone in strength, held on stubbornly. But, tong! After a long struggle, Heracles finally flicked near in the opposite direction. Boom! Soon, Heracles' huge body appeared in front of Yuan's eyes in an instant. But, it's over. Boom! Heracles' cudgel didn't reach Yuan. 30 minutes. Quang! The cudgel that passed by him. The cudgel felt more like it had fallen down rather than being swung. Yuan didn't dodge or block the cudgel. Instead, a player kit was clutched in his hand. 12 hours 0 minutes and 17 seconds. 17 more seconds had passed since the 30-minute time limit. He thought he had almost run out of time. Just when he thought he had finally caught it, time had run out. Yuan spoke, brushing his chest. 1. Swish! Heracles tore the bandages he had put in his inventory and wrapped them around his body. Heracles tore open the bandage he had in his inventory and wrapped it around his body. No way, even for me, my brain isn't surrounded by muscles. The bandage was coated with medicine to stop the bleeding of the wound. The wound inflicted by Kusanagi delayed recovery, leaving the wound clear for quite a long time. On the other hand, although there were no visible wounds, Yuan had almost exhausted his magic power. Thanks to this, the two were sitting facing each other and recovering their bodies. There are no fatal wounds. Yuan checked Heracles' wound. The sweat he shed is probably because of the poison. Even Susanoo, who wielded Kusanagi, inflicted only such shallow wounds on him. He really had a ridiculously strong body. The wound from the thunderbolt wasn't that big either. His skin was just a little tanned, and it wasn't even a wound. Did you even time it? Heracles, who had finished bandaging, opened his mouth. Yuan shook his head. No, then, it was faster than expected. Quite a lot. Even thinking about it again, it felt creepy, so Yuan shook his head. I thought I could have lasted about 10 more minutes. 40 minutes. He thought he would be able to fight that much if he squeezed out his magic power to the limit. If he used Qian Maryong and Gigantification, and shared positions with Susanoo to fight together. He thought he could buy enough time against Heracles, who was poisoned by Hydra's venom. But it was unexpected. No matter how much he obtained Yggdrasil's club, he didn't expect Heracles to be this strong. If I hadn't been poisoned, I could have lasted 10 minutes. He began to think that maybe the one who contributed the most to this fight was neither himself nor Susanoo, but Hydra. A monster comparable to Yamada no Orochi. It was a possible victory because he had just finished fighting such a guy. The bleeding of the wound was quick. Heracles calmly reached out his hand. The horn, it's in the inventory, give it to me. Yuan obediently took out the horn at his request and handed it to Heracles. It was a different reaction from before. Heracles, who held the golden horn in his hand, put it back into his inventory. I caught it without fail. As the next one the Erymanthian boar. You seem to know the 12 labors quite well. Seeing how you even memorized the order. I studied a little. I will allow you to accompany me, but do not interfere with the task. Yuan's request was only to accompany him. However, Heracles had no intention of ever receiving help with the task. That's the condition. Okay, Yuan didn't intend to push himself any further. Since he lost the bet, he didn't think Heracles would break his promise. However, there was a line for him too. If the condition of the bet was not accompanying, but let's do the task together, Heracles would not have accepted the bet in the first place. Because he would never make a promise he wouldn't keep. However, still, I'm just wondering. There was something he had to say. Do you think Hera will just sit still like this? Do you think Hera will just sit still? If Hera does not back down in the end, we have no choice but to respond strongly. No way, even I don't have my brain surrounded by muscles. It was the right thing to say. Rather than Heracles, it was closer to Son Goku that his brain was made of muscles. Contrary to his appearance, Heracles was quite quick-witted and quick-witted. It was just a problem that his vision was sometimes narrowed due to his upright sense of justice. Maybe he's up to something right now. But why? Nevertheless, it is also clear that he will not break his promise to me. Heracles continued, his blue eyes sparkling. Otherwise, I'll wring her neck first. It was an unusually violent and eerie remark. It also meant that Heracles had made a lot of determination for this bet. And Hera, of course, would know that. It was a bet with Heracles, not anyone else. If she didn't keep it, she would have no choice but to turn Heracles into an enemy. Something that should never happen. But for some reason, Eugene felt uneasy about this task. Do you think the task will go smoothly? What are you talking about? Why do you think only that side will work? It was none other than Heracles. He wasn't someone to worry about. He was no different from Son Goku, who possessed the power of immortality in a different sense. An absolute body that no sword or skill could penetrate. He endured the poison of the Hydra and received the sword of Susanoo, the top examiner of the tower, with his bare body. I can't help but believe it. Still, Eugene chose Heracles' side, not Hera's. There were two reasons. The first was because of Hargan's request. Find Heracles and ensure his safety. However, it wasn't just because of that request that Eugene came to find Heracles. If I had to choose between Olympus and Heracles, there was no need to think long. Of course, the latter. I'm sorry to Olympus, but it was an inevitable choice. No matter how big a guild Olympus is, Eugene, who knows Heracles, worth better than anyone, had no choice but to make this choice. Heracles was worth more than all of Olympus rankers combined, excluding Zeus. From now on, his role is to deal with the variables if any variables arise in the task. I just hope nothing happens over there. All he could do was wish for the safety of Olympus. Eugene thought to himself for a moment. Please, may this incident be a minor mishap caused by Hera's greed. The main building of Olympus was packed with players. 1,000 players, 100 rankers, many people gathered together and discussed one topic. It was the story of Hera, the high ranker who was the core of Olympus. If Hera continues to resist to the end, we have no choice but to respond strongly. That's right, the true bloodline of Olympus is Hades, no matter what. Raise an army of hell. There is no need to go that far. At our Dionysus altar, there were only flattering and sweet words. This was the second time in the thousands of years of Olympus history that the king had changed. When the king changes, the power structure changes completely. This was especially true for a ranker like Hades, who had no interest in politics. In order to catch his eye, they had to be at the center of power. And everyone here saw the conflict with Hera as an opportunity. What a waste of time. Hades believed in the power of collective intelligence, even though more was better than one. If this many people gathered and put their heads together, wouldn't they come up with at least one mind-blowing idea? But what the heck, all the people who gathered were busy flattering him, and not a single one of them came up with a decent idea. Disband. So, at our Demeter altar, yes. I got it, so I told everyone to disband. A dull voice dropped the order to disband. The rankers and players in the conference room, who had been hesitating, hurriedly left their seats. Hades sat alone in his seat, sinking his buttocks deep into the throne and raising his head toward the ceiling. He felt tired. Is this really not the right place for me? Poseidon and Zeus headed for the 100th floor, to pierce through the ceiling and head higher. But Hades couldn't do that. By that time, Hera had begun to move, and Hades could not leave Olympus, which was already in turmoil. But he still didn't fit in here. No, to be exact, he didn't fit in with this many people. He hated things that were this complicated and difficult, so he locked himself in hell, where it was hard to find even a shadow of a person. He found friends among the monsters of hell, and eventually became their king. But then, 2 of the 3 gods disappeared, and Hades ascended to the throne of Olympus. A place where he didn't belong. Maybe I should just hand it over to Hera. That's what he was muttering. That's right. Creak. Hades turned his head and looked straight ahead. A long carpet laid out from the door to the throne. In the middle of it, a robed figure was walking slowly. Since when? He had checked that all the rankers in the conference room had left. And there had been no sign of anyone until just a moment ago. He had a bad feeling. Hades opened his mouth to the approaching robed figure. What are you? Allow me to introduce myself. Creak. Hades looked straight ahead. A long carpet laid out from the door to the throne. In the middle of it, a robed figure was walking slowly. Since when? He had checked that all the rankers in the conference room had left. And there had been no sign of anyone until just a moment ago. He had a bad feeling. Hades opened his mouth to the approaching robed figure. What are you? Allow me to introduce myself. The robed figure bowed respectfully to Hades. Question. I come in the name of Hera. They call me the Foolish Chaos. Chapter 338. Thud, thud. The pig, as large as a mountain, snorted. The ground shook every time it took a step. Its hot breath rose into the sky like smoke, and the surrounding air became warm. All of this was because it was angry. Quite the hot-tempered fellow. Thud. Hercules planted his 2 feet firmly on the ground. He gripped his club in one hand and looked at the boar that had appeared before him. And Wu Yun, who was watching the two from afar, put a walnut in his hand and popped it into his mouth. It was a good show. It's like a movie. The only thing missing was popcorn. It was amazing to be able to watch such an entertaining show without lifting a finger. The clash between Hercules and the Erymanthian boar would probably be over in an instant. The Erymanthian boar was as large as a behemoth. However, Hercules was strong enough to pick it up with one hand. As expected, Kwang, Wu Yun saw the giant boar flying up into the sky. Queek. The boar, which had been squealing, fell to the ground after flying high into the air. Hercules, who had knocked the boar away, put his club back on his shoulder. It's hot. Sizzle. The ground, which had been glowing red, gradually returned to its original state. The Erymanthian boar had the power to burn the ground with its breath and change the weather. It was only natural that the weather would return to normal now that the boar had been defeated. And this was the 4th task given to Hercules. Wu Yun kept his eyes busy while cracking walnuts. Nothing much is happening yet. It was already the 4th task. There were only 8 tasks left. At this rate, it would take less than a month to complete all the tasks. Wang. It was then that the kid rang. It was a message from Helgen. He had already sent a message saying that he had met Hercules. There was no particular reason for them to contact each other. Maybe that's why. Wu Yun felt a strange ominousness through the trembling kit. What's wrong? My great-uncle has passed away. Great-uncle. 2 people came to mind. Poseidon and Hades. After a moment of contemplation, Wu Yun asked. Hades, by any chance? Yes, Hades. He's dead. It was a voice that seemed possessed by evil. It meant that the situation was that difficult. Hades is dead, suddenly. It was such an unexpected piece of news that it was hard to believe. Hades was a high ranker ranked 51st. How could such a Hades die so suddenly? Furthermore, he was known to have been in the center of Olympus recently. Tell me the details. What exactly happened? If it was true that Hades was dead, the fight would be difficult. Currently, there was no one in Olympus who could succeed the king's lineage. The person most suited for the position was Hades, and the next in line was Hera. However, if Hades was dead, the position would fall to Hera. I don't know the details. However, he was suddenly found dead in the middle of the palace. Suddenly, you say, it's as if he was assassinated. Any traces of a fight? No, not at all. That meant that he died in an instant, so quickly that no one could tell how he died. However, that was impossible. It was Hades, of all people. Even if his opponent was Odin, he wouldn't be able to do that. At the very least, the other rankers in the palace should have noticed something. However, that guy, one person came to mind for you one. There was someone who could do that. I understand. What do you mean, you understand? For now, find the one who killed Hades. The king has been murdered, so the position must remain vacant until the culprit is found. Are you trying to frame Hera as the culprit? Harkin was quick-witted. He understood the meaning behind Yuan's words and asked curiously. However, Hera doesn't have the means to kill her granduncle. It's impossible for her to kill him so silently. Of course, Hera wasn't the culprit. Even if she was, it would be nearly impossible to prove that she did it. She didn't have the ability to do so. Whether Hera is the culprit or not, putting her on the suspect list will delay the succession of the throne. We can buy some time. Buy time. Is that the point? Yes. How much? As much as we can. As much as possible. He had hoped that this was just a mishap caused by Hera's greed, but it wasn't like that anymore. They'll probably want to hurry things up on their side. I understand. That was the end of the call with Harkin. It seemed that he had called in a rather urgent situation, as he could hear other people's urgent voices through the phone. What's wrong? Was it because Yuan's expression was unusual? Heracles, who had approached after confirming that the boar he had struck down was dead, asked. Yuan hesitated for a moment before telling Heracles about his conversation with Harkin. Then, something's gone wrong, Heracles muttered with a serious expression. Hera has made her move first. What are we going to do? What do you mean? I'm asking if we should continue with the task. His worries continued. After a while, wait, he took out his kit and called someone. The ringing continued for a long time. After a long while, the other person answered the phone. What is it, Lady Hera? Have you heard the news? Have you heard the news, Hera? It was a fairly calm voice considering that he had just heard about the death of the king of Olympus. His opponent was Hera, the previous king of Olympus, Zeus' wife and a high ranker at 97th place. What news? Haven't you heard yet? A moment of silence. The reply came a bit late. Do you think I did it? Didn't you? Of course not. How could I possibly have? Hera's excuses were pretty much invincible. In reality, it was almost impossible for her to have killed Hades with her abilities. Of course, Heracles didn't think she would obediently confess to what she had done. Instead, what Heracles wanted to hear was something else. Is the bet still valid? Of course, keep that in mind. Click, Heracles gritted his teeth. A voice filled with suppressed anger escaped from his throat. If you don't keep your promise, I'll start by breaking your neck. I promise. I'll hang up now. Beep. The call was cut off one-sidedly. Yuan, who had been listening to the call from the side, looked at Heracles, back. He could tell without looking at his expression what Heracles was thinking, how angry he was right now. Tell me. Without turning around, Heracles asked. How much time do you think we have? Time. He was talking about the time until the empty throne's succession ceremony. After thinking for a moment, Yuan recalled his conversation with Harrigan and answered. 10 days at the shortest. Half a month at the longest. 10 days. It wasn't a long time at all. There were 8 remaining tasks. Each and every one of them wasn't easy. In fact, the time was extremely insufficient to complete the tasks. Heracles hurriedly dialed another number. The dial tone rang briefly. Hey, what the hell? You keep not answering your calls. I'm sorry, brother Apollo. As Apollo criticized him for not being able to reach him for a long time, Heracles quickly apologized and continued speaking. Can I borrow the sun chariot? A few years after Zeus' disappearance and the change of kings, Olympus had lost its king once again. The king's seat couldn't be left empty. Along with the voices saying that Olympus had to choose a new king, voices saying that the king had to be avenged erupted simultaneously. And among them, click, at the center of Hera's temple, Hera, who was sitting at the head seat of the long, round table, flipped over her player kit. Impudent bastard, Hera muttered irritably and grumbled with an agitated face. How dare that punk do whatever he wants to me? In the past, she had been the queen of Olympus. An existence with the power second only to Zeus. Not even the 3 gods, Poseidon, Hades, and Zeus, could speak rudely to her. No, if that happens, this fight will become a fight between that guy and me. If that happens, this fight will be between that guy and me. Chapter 339. Translated text. The scorching heat that penetrates deep within, something that only Apollo possesses. One of the objects known to be the fastest means of transportation in this tower. The sun chariot, Yuan and Heracles were riding on it. Drool. Heracles fell asleep. To be able to sleep so well in this situation. Perhaps it is to conserve his energy, even at a time like this. Indeed, it's not like the task is easy. His battle with the Hydra, and his capture of the Erymanthian boar. Every task was not an easy one. Furthermore, Heracles had been moving without rest to finish his bet with Hera as soon as possible. He must be quite exhausted from all that has happened so far. I'll leave him alone for now. Because this guy was the key to this battle. It's rare to see Heracles so passionate. He naturally avoided battles. If it wasn't necessary, Heracles was someone who didn't use his fists. That's why he had only been chopping down trees in a forest for the past 1,000 years, until the gigantomachy started again. It was the same even when it was something necessary. He didn't use his fists excessively. It was because he knew what power his fists possessed, and what would happen because of it. But, this time, it was different. The problem is over there. If Hera were to take over Olympus, the story would change. The foolish chaos must have taken Heracles into account. He must have started his plan while taking Heracles into account. If so, then Heracles was no longer the universal key that could solve all incidents. Swish, Yu-won stared at the floor of the sun chariot. Long ago, just like when he was planning, Yu-won started to draw on the floor with his scabbard as a brush. I need to find the key piece. In a fight between individuals, strength and weakness is all that matters, but in a large battle like this, there is always a key. He's completely redrawn the board. Swish, scribble. Olympus, Hera, foolish chaos, Heracles, and even Hades, who was dead. As he drew their detailed relationships, each of them became chess pieces and appeared in front of Yuan's eyes. I need to redraw the board as well. The strongest piece was Heracles. However, the opponent's pieces were covered in a thick fog, and he couldn't see them well. I need a variable. In this current situation, what is the strongest card that I can use? Yu-won continued to draw as he slowly searched through his mind. Thud, the sun chariot landed on the ground. Heracles, who had been asleep, came to his senses as the heavy weight fell. How long did I sleep? With his eyes half open, Heracles yawned with his mouth wide open as he looked around. Are we there already, Hom? It felt like it was the first time in a long time that he had slept so deeply. Indeed, it felt like he hadn't gotten any proper rest since he started his tasks. The sun chariot was really good, he realized again. That guy is. As soon as he woke up, Heracles looked for Yu-won first. There was no sign of anyone around. He wondered if Yu-won had also fallen asleep. But, what are you doing right now? Yu-won was sitting with his arms crossed, his back turned to Heracles. Heracles, who had asked the question, soon shut his mouth. He wanted to hurry and complete the next task, but the feeling was different from usual. Yu-won didn't respond when he called out to him. He wasn't asleep either. That meant he was lost in thought. How much more time passed like that? Contact Athena. Yu-won, who had been staring at the player kid in front of him, spoke. First of all, Yu-won's words continued for a long time. Heracles, who had been waiting for him to finish speaking, pressed his temples with his fingers and asked. Will it really happen like that? It's the most likely scenario right now. They won't want to waste time over there either. That's true, but there's no harm in believing. It's not bad to have insurance. Indeed, nodding his head at those words, Heracles took out his player kit and left a message for Apollo. A message slowly written with clumsy fingers. After leaving the message, Heracles got up from his seat. Let them figure it out. Are you going to stay here? Yes, why bother when you're not going to help anyway? If you really want to help, it would be better to help them. He had just finished his fourth task, but Heracles was confident. He was confident that he could complete this task with his own strength. That's why he felt that having Yu-won accompany him was a waste of manpower. However, will you not regret those words? Quote. Heracles made a puzzled expression at Yu-won's somewhat confident words. And then, with a confident face, he hit his chest with one hand. Of course, really, it was a meaningful word and expression. Keep those words in mind. Yu-won got up from his seat and started to walk with a somewhat joyful face. And half a day after that, thud, with both arms full of strength, Heracles muttered, his face full of disgust, holding a shovel the size of a house. What kind of ordeal is this? Moo, the giant cows were mooing. Even at this hour, they were eating as much as their bodies and shitting out as much as they ate. And Heracles was cleaning up the shit that those cows had left, shit that hadn't been cleaned up for 1,000 years. It was a task he couldn't seem to get used to. Cleaning up this much shit wouldn't be easy for anyone who didn't have such brute strength, but the problem wasn't strength but smell. It hadn't even been half a day since he started. Heracles was experiencing a hell he had never experienced before. And then Heracles' kit rang. Kim Yu-won, are you really okay not getting my help? Snap, it was a message as if he knew about this situation. This bastard. Heracles felt angry at someone else for the first time in a long time. If Yu-won was in front of him right now, he would have punched him right away. But he couldn't help it. The words had already been spoken, and he couldn't take them back. Thud. In the end, Heracles started shoveling again. All he could do was hate the cows that kept shitting in front of him. And Yu-won watched Heracles from a distance where the smell couldn't reach him. He's stubborn, after all. He intended to stop Hera by completing the task no matter what. After Hades died, Heracles' will had become even stronger. He thought that if this continued, Olympus might fall into ruin. That's why he was obsessed with the task. Yu-won secretly wished that he would choose to fight Hera, even if it meant some sacrifice, rather than an uncertain bet. But that's not like him. To seek the best outcome, even if it meant taking risks. That was Heracles, and it was the reason why Heracles was called a hero. Because he always sacrificed himself to create a beneficial outcome for everyone. Thud. Yu-won looked at Heracles, who was spreading shit with a shovel the size of a house in an instant. It was a truly terrifying speed. The sight of Heracles moving the shovel lightly, even while using gigantification, was terrifying. This is the fifth one. The task that Heracles said was the most difficult, along with the third trial. If it moves. Yu-won enjoyed the sight and thought about the remaining tasks in his head. The sixth task, catching the three-headed dog of Stymphalos. The seventh task, capturing the Cretan bull. 10th, bring the red cattle of Gariwans alive. And 11th, is it the 11th, out of a total of 12 tasks? Yu-won recalled the 11th task. To bring the golden apples from the Garden of Hesperides. That was the goal of the 11th task. However, Yu-won wasn't interested in the golden apples. Instead, there was something he had to get from that garden. My mother, Thetis, wanted to make me immortal. Achilles. He was a high ranker belonging to Olympus, a ranker with a high rank compared to his skills. There was one reason, it was because of one of his characteristics. So, along with my birth, my mother soaked my body in the river Styx and applied ambrosia. His tenacious vitality, Achilles' vitality, which never tires and never dies, was so great that he seemed to be an immortal who did not die. However, the result was a failure. What immortality? Just applying it to the body would have worked. I got a little stronger, but it wasn't immortality. Everyone, keep this in mind. Don't put any elixir on your skin, put it in your mouth. Saying so, Achilles glared at Sun Ogong. He seemed very envious of Sun Ogong, who was a truly immortal being, unlike him. So where did you get that? Like that, he revealed his secrets one by one. I don't know, I only know that it's next to the golden apple tree. Golden apple tree, a murmur burst out in a surprised voice. At those words, everyone's gaze turned to the owner of the voice. It was just a small mutter to himself, but Heracles' voice was so thick and loud that it was impossible not to hear it. Like that, focused gaze. Heracles opened his mouth with an embarrassed face and a much smaller voice than before. I've been there before. A castle above the clouds. Hera arrived at Olympus, the most sacred castle. Thousands of players and rankers riding a chariot flying in the sky followed her. Thud. Hera, who stepped on the castle above the clouds, took a deep breath. The red cloth wrapped around her body fluttered in the wind, and the refreshing air stimulated the tip of her nose. It's been a while, this place too. It used to be a place like home. But after Zeus was purged, she had never come here once. Thud. In front of her, numerous rankers and players from the Wang clan blocked her way. Hera, who was about to enter the castle, opened her mouth to the blonde man at the forefront. I have come to find my place. Go back, Hargan. He glared at Hera and said. The funeral hasn't even been held yet. I don't think the order matters, does it? Go back. That moment, Chuck, at Athena's gesture, the rankers from Wang's side took a stance. It looked like they were about to draw their weapons and use their skills at any moment. Otherwise, we will consider you an enemy. Is there any way to stop me? Suck. Hera's gaze turned to Athena, who was holding Aegis in her hand. It will be difficult with just that child. At her words, Hargan sensed it. Heracles was absent, and Hades was dead. The Apollo siblings refused to fight her, their birth mother. Even if they became enemies, they couldn't attack their birth mother. The only remaining force was Athena. Olympus, forces were weakened. And Hera had come for that gap. Yes, it was amazing. Suddenly, it seemed strange. How did that guy know about this situation? Hargan took a step back. Beautiful hair colored like oranges soaked in water. White and fair skin and a much clearer focus than before. He had only seen her face once, but it was an unforgettable face. Pandora, long ago, the girl who had opened the box and received a curse appeared at this place. Chapter 340, Pandora was a being that could not be judged by the rankings. Even the ranking management office could not make a proper judgment about her. Perhaps they are also preparing. The foolish chaos informed Hera of the danger. In all likelihood, Olympus would be preparing to stop her. Contact the Apollo siblings. Tell them that I do not wish to kill my own blood. Never raise your voice or force them. Upon hearing that, Hera immediately contacted Apollo and Artemis. As a mother, how could she fight her own children? Did they want to leave her with such terrible memories? She appealed to their sympathy, and in the end, the Apollo siblings gave up fighting her. It was just as the foolish chaos had said. Once you deal with the Apollo siblings, there will be nothing to stop you. Even Athena will not be able to stop you, Lady Hera. After hearing his confirmation, Hera could no longer contain her excitement. She wanted to return to her hometown, the royal city of Olympus, as soon as possible. So Hera prepared her troops. The foolish chaos did not stop her. Hera took that as a sign of permission. But, why on earth is that bitch here? A woman with crimson hair and a beautiful appearance that one could never forget once seen. Long ago, she was an ordinary ranker who had received the box of Zeus as a gift. Pandora was so beautiful that she was comparable to Tsukuyomi of the three-eyed tribe, and she was popular even within Olympus. Many men were smitten with her, and many were jealous of her. Hera was one of them. That was why Hera had chosen Pandora as the owner of the box. I heard the news, but Hera's head throbbed at the sight of Pandora standing before her. How can she be so unscathed? Surely she would have become an invalid in exchange for gaining great power. It was difficult to understand. The fact that she was here. The fact that she looked so unscathed, just like she did now. It all displeased her. Well, Hargan grinned at Hera's hesitation. What will you do? The situation had changed from before. Hera could not answer readily. Pandora was an existence that could not be judged by ranking. Even the Ranking Management Bureau could not make a proper judgment about her. The reason was simple. It was because she had not been active for too long. After opening the box, Olympus imprisoned Pandora, who could not be controlled. Because of that, she was pushed out of the top 200 rankings. As time passed and there was no activity, the Bureau rated her influence and power as low. However, Hera knew better than anyone else. She knew what kind of power was in that box. If we have a full-scale war here, we won't know who will win or lose. Hera, she was also a high ranker within the top 100, but her opponents were formidable. Athena, the war hero of Gigantomachia, and Pandora. Even Hera could not be sure of victory against those two. Snap! Hera gritted her teeth. The moment she had been waiting for had finally come. Once the king's funeral is over, I have to go back like this. I'll be back then. Swish! At Hera's gesture, the soldiers began to retreat. Harkin did not relax his tension until they had all left. Athena was ready to draw her sword at any moment, and Pandora also glared at Hera's back with sparkling eyes. Fortunately, nothing else happened. Hera turned away. For now, that is. Phew. Harkin, relieved of tension, let out a stuffy breath. And then, he took out his player kit and called U1. I just came and went. I just came and went. I could tell from the first words. Fortunately, it seemed to have gone well without any problems. He said he would visit after the funeral. Do you think he'll really come then? He won't make us wait that long. He only bought us a little time. I couldn't believe it, but I really didn't think he would move this quickly. It hasn't even been that long since your grandfather passed away. He's really too much. Harkin muttered to himself and then continued in an urgent voice. Anyway, I guess we've passed one hurdle with this. Thanks to you, I'm alive. And I'm sorry, I've been a little busy on my end too. U1, when are you coming? Just a moment, Pandora. Hey, I'll contact you later. The call was cut off urgently. U1 stared blankly at the player kit in his hand for a moment. What? U1 put the kit back into his inventory as the call was abruptly cut off. Before his eyes, Heracles was in the middle of carrying out his 9th task. Heracles was fighting alone against the Amazon warriors. Watching him, U1 recalled Pandora's face. Even though she's half, if she had the power of an outer. When he had first met her, U1 had felt like he had discovered a treasure. If he could just pull her to his side, she would be worth more than just her strength alone. She's one of the few beings who might be able to avoid the eyes of the foolish chaos. The foolish chaos possessed a special eye. Because of that one eye, they had lost so much. It was as if he could see everything within the tower in the palm of his hand. Using that ability, the foolish chaos had planned many things. He lived to lead the tower into chaos and to destroy it. The one who could escape the eyes of such a foolish chaos was Pandora. Because she was a being who only half belonged to this tower. Moo. Yuan lifted his head at the sound of the cows. It seemed that this task was almost complete. What's the matter? Heracles approached, drenched in sweat. In his hand was the belt of the Amazon warriors. He succeeded. The Amazons were considered one of the most dangerous tribes in the tower. The Amazon warriors were all rankers who were obsessed with combat, and their tribe had the power to rival a large guild. And this task was to bring back the belts of those warriors. Naturally, a clash was inevitable, and Heracles had been victorious against them. Of course, For the time being, the Amazon warriors will become the enemies of Olympus. Well, that was something that Olympus would have to figure out later. It seems that Hera visited Olympus. Heracles, who had been wiping his sweat with a towel, stopped at Yuan's belated reply. Hera, yes, why there? The reason should be obvious. Heracles sighed at Yuan's answer. It wasn't that he hadn't expected this to happen. But even so, it had been too soon. Anyway, it seems to have gone well for you, judging from that reaction. It would be a burden for Hera to clash with Pandora. That's good, we passed one hurdle with this. However, we had bought time, but we didn't know how much. Hera had begun to move. Hercules couldn't help but feel impatient just from that fact. We need to hurry a little more. There's no need to rush like that. Bam, Hercules finally exploded at Yerwin's reply. When he struck one side of the rock Yerwin was leaning against with his fist, the rock crumbled into sand and fell down below. That's one thing that irritates me about you. Snap. His forehead bulged with veins. Hercules, who couldn't hide his emotions to this extent. It was definitely not something you would normally see. I know, you're smart. You always look a few steps ahead. As if you know the future. Crash. The rock in his hand turned to sand and poured down from Hercules' hand. But I'm going crazy. I'm impatient. I'm afraid that the territory that we Olympus have built up until now will be ruined. I'm afraid it will disappear into a blood-stained history. Thud. Hercules wasn't doing the 12 tasks for nothing. In order to somehow end this fight with minimal damage. He was here even though he knew what was happening on Olympus. Our great uncle Hades has passed away. Hades, death. That set fire to Hercules' already impatient heart. Although he hadn't seen him many times. He was his own flesh and blood, his family. The situation has gotten out of hand. You should know that much. He's alive. Hercules' eyes grew wide. Unable to finish what he was going to say, Hercules repeated the same words again with surprised eyes. That much. What had he just heard? As he stopped talking with his mouth agape, the sound of the approaching Amazon warriors could be heard from far away. And only then, Ali, Hercules asked, understanding what Yerwin had said. What do you mean? I just mean that it's possible. It can't just be idle talk coming from you. Definitely. It wasn't just idle talk. Saying that someone who was supposed to be dead is actually not was something to be said with caution, especially in front of someone like Heracles who was related to Hades by blood. Even though he knew that, there were probably two reasons why Wu Wan said it. Is it to calm me down with confidence? He's quick-witted. Still, there was nothing he could say. This time, it was different from when he moved Pandora. He was just expecting it to be a repetition of something that had already happened once. That was why Wu Wan could not answer Heracles in detail. Let's go. There's not much time left. Are you not going to tell me? I don't have anything to say. It's frustrating, but it relieves my mind a little. Maybe Hades is alive. With just that one hope, more than half of the impatience burning inside Heracles subsided. This way, Heracles is here. That bastard took the warrior's symbol. Driven by evil, the warriors began to chase after Heracles. I guess I need to hurry differently now. Let's go. Heracles moved towards the sun chariot again. There were only 3 tasks left. Wu Wan followed Heracles. At the same time, he thought about the situation over there while chewing on the contact from Hargan. It's a little faster than I thought. One move had already been blocked. There was no way Hera would give up like this. Everyone already knew how obsessed she was with the throne. Once the wave started hitting, it was unstoppable. Hera would move again. This time, she would be worried about Pandora. She would probably figure out another way. It would be easier if Hades was alive. Clench. But I don't know when or how he'll be back. He felt sorry for not being able to give Heracles a proper answer, but for now, there was nothing he could say. Process, result. Out of those, Wu Wan only knew the result. In that situation, he could not afford to take Hades into account. For now, he had to think without excluding Hades. Still, he believed, he's Hades, not anyone else. Hades, the god of death. A name given to him because he was closest to death. And because he was a ranker who had returned after overcoming even death before the regression.